Chapter 5. Bez had a rotating list of things she was sure of in life. Her current surety was that, in less civilized times, Makeda Hicks would have run her through with a scimitar without a second thought. It was an oddly arousing thought, and not the first that had sprung to mind since she'd creatively entered the B&B. Lockpicking was an art, after all, and stumbled upon Makeda and her Hell Hoover, demon cat, and soft, warm body that it fit snugly against her own. Makeda sat across the table from Bez, freshly showered and dressed in an outfit that made her look like a character from the 90s American television shows that had been syndicated in Iberania. Her long dark locks were pulled into two bonds on either side of her head and held in place with pink scrunchies. A few locks had been left down to frame her face, and she wore a hot pink button-down shirt with a cactus pattern, straight-leg jeans cut off at the knee, and pink slippers. She picked up a mug that had the words, "I will cut you," written in glittery black text, and her finger, the one that wore the ring that had brought Bez here, tapped on the word cut. Bez wasn't the greatest at picking up hints, but she understood the message, and she ignored it. She still couldn't believe that this woman was possibly the key to her family's redemption and her grandmother's peace, but the more she looked at Makeda, the less doubt there was. She'd stared at Lala al-Horodasi's face every day growing up. If not the painting that hung in her family home's entryway, then the murals and banners and money emblazoned with the pirate queen's image. The similarity was faint, but it was there. The wide-set eyes, the jut of her jaw and breadth of her forehead. "Maybe if you cleaned your glasses every now and then, you wouldn't have to stare so hard. Is there something on my face?" Makeda scowled. Makeda's annoyance might also be evidence, as the al-Horodasi temper was legendary, but if everyone who got mad when Bez was around was a descendant of Queen Aziz, then the missing queen had been quite busy in the post-war years. "Yes," Bez answered. Then she turned her head to look around the dining room for the 100th time, taking in the framed pictures and lived-in furniture that reminded her so much of her own family home that she'd been avoiding for the last few years. "There's a patch of lighter skin just below your left ear, where your neck meets your jawline." Makeda placed her hand over her neck. Bez knew that her palm was rough from scrubbing and her fingers were strong with blunt-cut nails. "It's a birthmark. My mom has it too," Makeda said, then jolted upright, her expression tensing with worry. "You didn't contact my mother, did you?" "No, I didn't call anyone because I prefer the element of surprise in my investigations. That and your grandmother's email made it clear that Ashley Hicks shouldn't be contacted." Bez saw a bit of the tension leave Makeda's body, though the worry remained in her eyes. "And the birthmark is a love bite, actually," Besnaria said, bypassing discussion of any family issues until she could investigate further. "Or that is what it has always been called. Lala's kiss, after Lala, the first queen of Iberania. The legend states that she wasn't born with it, though all of her descendants have been. It appeared on her skin the morning after she killed her husband. That wasn't in the Encyclopedia Britannica when I was a kid," Makeda said, then caught herself, wiping the interest from her face. "Not that it matters." "Queen Lala," Aura said. "Kashan had mentioned her when he gave me the ring. But that was all so long ago, and I never got as interested as my daughter did. She was a pirate queen who ruled Iberania and the first al-Horodasi," Bez said, straightening in her seat. She was brought to Old Iberania as an enslaved child. She'd been kidnapped from a tribe in North Africa. It said, though she talked very little about her past. At some point, she led a revolt and escaped, stole an Iberanian ship, and took to plundering pirates, like the ones who had stolen her from her family. She became the scourge of the Mediterranean. "Ooh, this is better than a History Channel show," Aura said, tapping her granddaughter on the arm. "Can you get on with this?" Makeda asked, unmoved. Her fleet was so bloodthirsty in their decimation of slavers, and so ruthless in their quest to liberate those who had been stolen for profit, that even the most feared pirates avoided them at all costs. Bess said, when the king of Old Iberania finally caught her, he offered her marriage or death, and surprising everyone, she chose marriage. Then she killed him on their wedding night, led an uprising of the various enslaved peoples of Iberania, and created her own unified monarchy on the island. She said it was her wedding gift to herself. "Yes," Aura clapped. "Now why don't they make this into a movie?" The love bite comes from the legend that the old king let his guard down as she sucked at his neck in their marital bed. She bit down to hold him in place as she shoved her blade into his guts and disemboweled him. Bez caught herself mid-swing of her imaginary knife just before she knocked over her mug. She grabbed a cookie from the plate in front of her instead, bringing warm chocolate chip delight to her mouth. She'd helped Aura slice and bake the pre-made dough while they waited for Makeda to clean. When she glanced at Makeda, the woman was trying to appear unmoved, but Bez saw the hint of another Al-Horadasi trait that overwhelmed all attempts at submission by outside DNA, the Dimple of Doom, so named because it was the last thing many saw before being run through by their pirate queen. That was a thrilling reenactment, but I don't see what any of this has to do with me, Makeda said. Since I've told you multiple times now, I'm going to have to assume this is some form of deflection, an attempt to throw me off. Bez smirked and poked her glasses up her nose. It won't work. You cannot hide from me, Makeda Hicks. I'm not hiding. I'm sitting here telling you to your face that I want no part in this, like I've been telling my family for most of my life. Makeda turned to look at her grandmother, furrows of worry stretching between her brows. Did you really send those forms in on my behalf when I asked you not to? And everything that I already went through? You didn't ask me not to send the forms. You said you didn't want to talk about it anymore, Aura said, moving back and forth in her seat. Bez's grandmother called that movement getting bitten in the pants by the guilt ants. I sent the forms in on my behalf, as a witness who'd known, in the biblical sense, a man claiming to be Prince Kashan, the lost heir to the throne, Aura continued. But I did point out that you were my granddaughter. Correct, Besnaria said. Her story was corroborated by reports of a musician in a band called Kashan and the Golden Crown Players. He claimed to be the son of a queen who'd lost her memory while away from her homeland and, after regaining it, decided to continue living a normal life. Aura Hicks mentioned you, as was necessary, and attached a very becoming photograph of you with a dab of paint on your nose and a ring on her finger. The ring was the main reason Besnaria was there, 2 months after she'd started her mission in the U.S., and 1 month and 3 weeks after she'd realized Lord Higginshargans had given her a file of clearly bogus claims when he'd sent her off. The man was terrible at his job, But there's this brief foray into the classified files of the higher-level investigators had revealed a dozen leads that were more promising. When she'd gotten word from her father about how upsetting the search was becoming for Henna Jeddah, as people began to dig into how exactly the Queen had been lost, Bez had decided she couldn't leave until she'd investigated every claim that the WFM hadn't. Each of them had turned out to be as false as the original file she'd received. It had only been a few days ago, as she prepared to head back to WFM headquarters in defeat, that she'd found Aura Hicks's email with the attached photo. That was how this covert operation had started. Covert, in that her superiors at the World Federation of Monarchists hadn't approved her request to investigate Makeda Hicks. In fact, they had issued what an easily swayed person might have considered a denial. But Besnaria hadn't been able to ignore what her instincts were telling her, and she couldn't ignore her promise to Henna Jeddah. How do we know this Kashan dude was telling the truth? How do you even know she's telling the truth? Makeda's question was almost a plea, and the look in her eye was crestfallen. I love my grandmother, but you can't take anything she says at face value. She lies about her birthday to get free cake at restaurants. She has multiple email accounts so she can keep using free trials. She tells everyone she sang backup for the Supremes during their residency here back in the day, when really she was working concessions. You ungrateful heifer, Aura muttered, reaching out to move the plate of cookies away from Makeda and toward Besnaria. Besnaria rocked back in her chair, balancing on two spindly legs. She didn't know what to make of this woman. In her years at the WFM, she had never come across someone desperate not to be royalty. WFM investigators were beset by con artists and scammers of all kinds, though more often just everyday people clinging to the possibility that there might be something more to their lives, to themselves intrinsically. Makeda looked like she would rather swallow sea hag slime than discuss this any further. Bez actually felt a twinge of regret at having to push this, but this was the only promising lead she'd ever stumbled across that hadn't immediately led to a dead end. Ms. Hicks, my job is to investigate claims that have merit, and in my professional opinion, what Aura Hicks submitted does. I am, of course, still investigating. That is my job. The trail of the man who called himself Prince Kashan disappears sometime around 1972, the summer after your grandmother received him carnally. Makeda frowned. Don't say that ever again. Thanks. As thrilled as I would be to find the so-called Prince Kashan, who would be the direct hereditary heir, right now I'm here to see you. Now that I've assessed you, I believe there's enough evidence to start the second phase of the investigation, but to do that, I'll have to bring you with me to Iberania. How she would do that was the issue, but she'd cross that bridge when she got to it. Bez knew she'd get the woman to come with her, but she hadn't been prepared for her stubbornness. I understand you may have some questions, Bez said, trying to sound professional. Feel free to ask anything. You a lesbian? Aura Hicks asked, squinting in her direction. Grandmore! Makeda placed both hands over her face. Don't just ask strangers things like that. I was asking for you. She's a fine-looking woman. I'm looking out for you. I meant questions specifically about the search for the missing heir, Bez said, feeling her ears go warm for the first time in years. I'm queer. I use the term pan, in part because it captures my puckish nature, but I prefer and have only dated women. with the exception of an unfortunate 2-week debacle with my high school best friend, Stephen. Pam. Okay then. Aura's grin broadened, and she glanced at her granddaughter and then back to Bez. Someone has been moping since she got dumped. She's always bringing home these girls who don't appreciate her, and I'm tired of it. Now, a more on-topic question. What happens now? Does she get a crown and all that good stuff? The woman nudged her granddaughter. Well, there are a few steps between my investigation and her receiving the title, Bez said. The first step would be coming to Iberania with me to be presented to the review board. The actual first step was making the WFM aware that she had, in fact, followed up on her lead and would be bringing Makeda to Iberania for consideration. Lord Higgins-Shoggins wouldn't be pleased that the heir had turned out to be American, and even less pleased that said American didn't seem to even want the role. But it would all work out. What are the other steps? Makeda asked, pulling her chair back so that Bez's legs no longer stretched alongside it. Not that it matters, since I won't be traveling to a foreign country with a total stranger, but you know, since you are talking about me, you could maybe fill me in. Bez wanted to ask when she'd stopped filling her in, but that wouldn't help matters. Prospects and their claims will be interviewed by the review board. If chosen, the selected heir will be provided clothing from Iberania's top fashion designers and a room in the royal wing at our 5-star hotel. Though if chosen, they'll be assigned a more permanent residence for their visits to the country for events. They'll also be given social media accounts where they can post images of their exploration of their possible new kingdom. There will be a ball at the brand new Seaside Resort, an event center to announce the heir. Makeda's eyes narrowed, and Bez, who was usually maddeningly opaque to other people, had the disturbing sensation of being seen through like the waters of Lala's lagoon. So, this whole thing is a tourism campaign for the island, is what you're saying, Makeda said. You're sitting here trying to ruin my life over a scheme from the Iberanian Tourism Board? Since when did you become so skeptical? Aura chided. And since when did you have a life? Makeda rolled her eyes. Bez cleared her throat. While this initiative was prompted by the World Federation of Monarchists, the Iberanian government's focus is the benefit an international royalty search and monarchy will bring to the country's tourism industry, in addition to revenue that might be raised by the sale of merchandise. Trust me, I know, Makeda said. She turned in her seat, just the slightest motion, and Bez looked over her shoulder at the area she turned away from. A china cabinet, with shelves lined with commemorative plates and bobbleheads. Those are from my daughter's old collection, Aura said when she followed Besnaria's gaze. Figured we might as well use them to go with the whole golden crown thing we have going on. So I get to be on a plate and wear some clothes that I don't want. That's what you're offering. Makeda cut in. All official prospects are compensated for their time, even if they don't win. Bez added. Compensated well. Bez said this as casually as she could, but she had taken a peek at Makeda's credit report, that odd American tradition of holding their citizens hostage via debt, and even more oddly, the lack of it. It had shown a lifetime of meticulous care for her financial situation, and then the recent appearance of an uncharacteristic and substantial amount for a business loan. Makeda began to work her bottom lip with her teeth, and Bez went in for the kill. You will be paid a handsome fee. You will get an all-expenses-paid vacation to an island paradise where you get to live out a true princess fantasy. Ball gowns, everyone staring at you and talking about how amazing you look. Attendants to provide your every whim within reason. It's a dream come true, yes? For just an instant, Bez thought she had won. Makeda's eyes went glossy. Of course, she might get misty-eyed as she realized the enormity of the luck that had befallen her. Then Makeda blinked and the soft sheen was gone, replaced by a rock-hard resolve. I get it. You probably need some comic relief for this thing, but I'm not the one. I want nothing to do with this. I refuse to be paraded around so people can laugh and judge whether I'm princess material. Why would people laugh? Bez asked. Makeda's gaze dropped away like a kicked seaside tray, and Bez had her answer. People had laughed at Bez when she'd said she was going to be Dame of the Guard when she grew up. They laughed when she said just about anything. Bez had never liked the laughter. She found it grating. But she also had never assumed that she herself was laughable. Not everyone was like Bez, though, with a hard head and thick skin and innate knowledge of her general worth, nay, superiority, as a human specimen. Do I look like a princess? Makeda asked. No, you don't actually, Bez said. She stood, shucking her jacket as she did, and unbuttoning the top buttons of her shirt, revealing the white tank top she wore underneath. Hey now, Aura said. Is this some Magic Mike shit? Don't think we're going to give you money just because you start shaking your ass. Bez was still looking at Makeda, whose gaze had jumped back up to hers, anger and hurt showing in the strain around her eyes. Personally, I think you look like a queen, but princess is better for the WFM's marketing purposes. Bez knelt before Makeda, as she had play-acted so many times as a child, and then stripped her shirt down her shoulder partially, revealing the tattoo that covered her arm from epaulette to elbow. If Makeda had known anything about her Iberonian heritage, she would have recognized the motif of waves cresting below the fish scale armor, the pattern as ubiquitous in Iberonian art as the vendetta blades tattooed below the epaulette on her shoulder. Instead, the woman had grown up in this city that had nothing in common with Iberonia apart from the sea that lapped at its shore. She took Makeda's hand, the one with the fish scale armor ring, and placed the warm palm and warmer metal of the ring against her exposed skin. She stared into Makeda's eyes, willing her to accept the truth of the situation. You wear Lala's ring, fish-scale armor crafted by Iberonian royal artisans, gifted to your grandmother by Prince Kashan. I have the armor of the royal guard on my skin because it is in my blood. I believe you are the lost heir, and I am willing to do anything to bring you back to Iberonia because it is your place and my duty. Makeda stared at her for a long moment, a moment in which Bez felt something bright and hot crush her whole body in its grip. Was this dizzy, heady feeling the blood oath sworn by Chet Chevalier to all Horadasi generation after generation kicking in? Or was it something else? Whatever the sensation was, for the first time ever, Bez felt a response to the call to honor and protect that she'd been searching for first in the military and then in the WFM. She tried to remember how her grandmother had described the sensation of pledging fealty to Queen Aziz in the Piazza Reggiana before the minarets of the palace. Makeda dragged her fingertips over Bez's arm, seemingly tracing the design, leaving a tingling trail in the wake of her gentle touch. Then she pulled her hand away and shook her head, as if clearing it. No, I said no. I'm not a princess, no matter who my grandfather was, and more important, I don't want to be one. You don't want to be one? Bez blinked, trying to process what had been said, though it made entirely no sense. Someone who refused to be a princess was utterly confounding to a person who had grown up longing to protect one. That's it? Aura asked, disappointment clear in her voice. Makeda raised both brows at her grandmother. That's it? Shouldn't you be proud that I'm not such a pushover anymore? Oh, you were never a pushover when it came to this, Aura said, shaking her head in disgust. What is this? Makeda asked. Not letting yourself have anything good, anything just for you. You're ready to give and give to everyone else, but have the nerve to get mad if anyone asks you to give to yourself, the old woman said. She turned to look at Bez. She thinks she's changed. Only thing changed is she doesn't smile while depriving herself. How is something just for me if I don't want it? Makeda looked at Bez and stood up. And I have changed. If I hadn't, I wouldn't be kicking her out right now. Time to go. Bez had to bring the heir to the throne back. She couldn't fail her grandmother, and leaving without Makeda Hicks would mean failure. But she hadn't imagined the heir would be completely resistant. She began running contingency plans in her head. The problem was, she didn't have any. This was what she relied on her brain fireflies for. When it came to Makeda Hicks, she wasn't yet sure what was driving her decisions. Instinct or a subliminal message being transmitted by the brain fireflies interfering with her main objective. Besnaria's gaze rested on Makeda for a bit, then slid to Aura. Actually, I'm stuck in town for a few days and need a place to stay until I can finalize my travel arrangements. I understand that the Golden Crown is the finest accommodation in the city. Do you have a room available? No, Makeda said. There are cheaper rooms at the big hotels and you can gamble there too. Maybe win some money and make this trip worthwhile. I can help with some of the repairs if I stay here, Besnaria added, her earnest gaze still on Aura. We don't need help with repairs, Makeda said. Hush, Aura said, tugging Makeda's shirt to pull her back down into her seat. Besnaria pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose, her gaze locking onto Aura. I noticed that tiles in the bathroom need recaulking, and there are cracks in the walls and ceilings of several rooms that could be easily fixed. A few shingles on the roof are loose too. I'll need something to keep me occupied until my passage back to Iberania is confirmed. Makeda jolted in her seat and looked at Besnaria askance. Wait, when were you in the other rooms, or out on the roof? Besnaria's eyes darted to Makeda, but only for a millisecond, before returning to Aura, who was the only other person invested in Makeda going to Iberania. You would do all that for free? Aura asked innocently, though there had been no mention of non-payment. Besnaria grinned and leaned in a bit, like she was getting ready to haggle at a swap meet. I'll do it in exchange for meals and a room. I like to keep my hands busy, and casinos don't appeal to me. If I take risks, it's only because the odds are in my favor. We don't need or want your help, Makeda cut in, but Aura was in deal-maker mode. Can you do plumbing? Something is wrong with the sink, and Makeda only made it worse when she tried to fix it. Bez nodded, and Aura turned in her seat. Take your dame friend's bag that's out there up to the terrace room. But what? You already turned down an opportunity of money for nothing that literally walked into our B&B. You have repair money I don't know about. Or should I turn that down too? Aura raised an eyebrow. No, that's what I thought. Bez watched Makeda stalk off and wondered what it would have been like to meet her without the burden of convincing her to do something she clearly didn't want to do. A chance encounter at a coffee shop, or in a dark club with music throbbing through them both. A place where Makeda wouldn't frown at her and see her as the enemy. She didn't often wonder about people in this way. She enjoyed a good fling, but her romantic musings were so few and far between that her father had sat her down and given her a list of rules after she'd broken yet another woman's heart with seemingly no compunction. 1. If something pisses her off, do the opposite of that. 2. If you piss her off, apologize. 3. If she likes kissing, kiss her a lot. 4. When she talks, pay attention to the details. Bez wasn't trying to date Makeda, though she imagined Rule 3 could be quite fine with her. But maybe those rules would also help her woo the woman into doing what she needed her to do. She couldn't do the opposite of what was pissing her off, but she could apologize. She followed her to the entryway in time to see Makeda give her duffel bag a light kick. Something about the restraint in the kick, enough to show anger but conscious not to break anything fragile in the bag, tugged at that sense of loyalty that had flared in her when Makeda's palm had rested on her arm. Bez went over to pick up the bag. "I apologize," she said, "for coming here and trying to ruin my life." Makeda asked without looking at her. "No, for taking you with me when I leave." She pushed her glasses up. "I don't leave jobs unfinished unless it's one I don't feel like doing. Unfortunately for you, I've been waiting for most of my life. And I've been running from it. You plan on kidnapping me?" Makeda asked, "Because that's the only way I'll be leaving with you." Bez had considered that option but decided against it. She placed an elbow on the reception desk and leaned against it so that she was slightly closer to Makeda's height. When the woman finally turned her way, Bez smiled. "I have no need of chloroform. I could be very charming when I have to be. You'll come with me, and it will be your own decision." Makeda's long lashes fluttered a few times as she blinked, then shook her head. "I think you mean very annoying." "Being annoying is also a useful tool in getting people to do what you want." Bez leaned down a couple of inches closer to Makeda and dropped her voice. "I let nothing in my arsenal go to waste, sea snail. Not a single thing." Most people were unnerved by a Chet Chevalier stare down, but Makeda tilted her head and held her gaze, not backing down an inch. Bez was suddenly reminded that she found nothing more attractive than a woman whose head was as hard as her own. Makeda knew what she wanted and what she didn't want, and Bez's determination was momentarily blinded by a brain firefly flashing the message. What would it be like if she wanted you? Nothing in your arsenal can go up against deep-rooted, intense, and unfaltering aversion to being a princess, Makeda said, her voice cool and rigidly controlled. "You might think I'm a pushover like everyone else does. And maybe I still am, but not with this. Don't waste your time thinking you'll change my mind." Makeda slipped past her, the fabric of her t-shirt brushing a static charge against Bez's cheap suit as she headed up the stairs. Bez turned to watch her go, noting her reaction for future reference and ignoring how snugly her shorts fit. She was about to follow after Makeda when the demon cat stalked down the stairs, stopping to stare. Bez blinked. "Fine, you win this round," Bez said, and then went back into the dining room. She'd regroup, and then she'd convince Makeda to leave with her, no matter what the stubborn American thought would happen. There was no other possible outcome. She had promised, after all. Her first and most fervent oath. She might lie through her teeth in the line of duty, but she didn't break promises to people she cared about. She'd bring the lost heir to Iberania and clear her family's name. Chapter 6. Makeda's plan was to avoid Biznaria for the duration of the woman's stay. It wasn't a detailed plan, like booby-trapping the B&B and catapulting the meddling investigator into the sea, but she was relying on her most valuable skill, patience. She only had to deal with the uninvited guest for a day or two, and when it came to the art of ignoring her own discomfort, Makeda had put in more than the required 10,000 hours of study to become a master. Despite this, by the second day, her patience was already beginning to wear thin. It shouldn't have been so difficult to keep her distance when the Iberonian was the only guest at a B&B with creaky stairs and multiple unoccupied rooms to hide in. But the woman seemed to have a preternatural sense of where Makeda would be and the ability to get there a few steps before her or creep up a few steps behind. If Makeda went to the kitchen for coffee, Biznaria was there, either already brewing a cup or preparing a delicious snack in her continued wooing of Grandmore. As Makeda had repaired the suit jacket she had ripped using Grandmore's trusty singer, Biznaria had stood guard to prevent pin pricks and help her feed the fabric through the machine. When Makeda tried to work through her to-do list, Biznaria showed up, smoothly co-opting each task from her or looking over her shoulder and giving suggestions. Earlier that morning, Makeda had driven to the grocery store on the other side of town, since she now avoided Grab-Right, like she would any of her many exes, and she'd sworn she saw Biznaria jogging behind her car, T-2000 style, in the rearview mirror. Makeda was starting to understand Steph's parting shots at her a little better. Having someone offer to handle the most basic tasks made her want to scream, and she'd only been dealing with it for approximately 36 hours. She could pour her own coffee. She was the only one who knew the exact proportion of cream and sugar. She could sew by herself. She could make her own plate. She could fold her own laundry. And she most certainly hadn't appreciated Biznaria's offers to tuck her into bed. She absolutely hadn't been up half the night thinking about that last one either. Insomnia was natural in times of stress. But the new levels of aggravation she was feeling had made her realize something. For the last few months, she told herself that she was some new, angry version of herself. But that wasn't true. It turned out all she'd been was numb. She hadn't changed. She'd gone from helpiness turned up to 11 to helpiness with some cheap noise-canceling headphones thrown over it. She'd never really gotten mad at Steph. She was still giving free labor to Grab-Right. She hadn't even raged about being stuck with a debt for a dream that wasn't hers. She'd quietly accepted it and continued to pay against the interest. Makeda had confused not feeling the overwhelming drive to give because she wasn't feeling anything at all with being a new, independent version of herself. She hadn't known the difference until Biznaria Chevalier had broken into the Golden Crown. Makeda was sure she hadn't left the door unlocked and shown her just how wrong she'd been. Now Makeda was tingling all over, like circulation returning to a limb that had fallen asleep, and feeling all kinds of uncomfortable things. Panic and terror and resentment that she'd have to be the girl she'd once been. Smiling awkwardly at school as classmates sneeringly called her princess and hounded her mercilessly. And smiling anxiously at home as her mother lovingly called her princess and poured another drink as she flipped through travel guides to Iberania. Fear that her mother would get involved in this mess. Annoyance that even when she minded her business, other people's desires still managed to seek her out and overshadow her own. And that she wasn't sure that she even had any of her own anymore, since her top priorities were the B&B and paying Amber's loan. It was like the investigator had smashed the lock on the vault of Makeda's pent-up frustration at just the right angle, and now the lid was off. The way Besnaria simultaneously tried to force Makeda to give in to her while treating her with a strange deference made Makeda feel a different throb, which was a problem. Her whole body had gone hot just from laying a hand on the investigator's admittedly well-sculpted biceps. What the hell had that been? Granmore had been sitting right there, and Makeda had still been momentarily ready to risk it all. Makeda wasn't a risk-it-all person. She generally lost by consistently hedging her bets. She worried that she would give in, not because she'd suddenly want to be a princess, but because Besnaria's chaotic presence would eventually wear down her resistance. On the third day, after a morning of successful evasion thanks to Kojak's yearly vaccination, she waited until she heard Granmore launch into one of her stories about her past boardwalk adventures and sneaked out of the house. No one could break the thrall of Granmore's reminiscences, and she decided to take advantage of it by going on her weekly boardwalk stroll. It was something she'd started after she'd moved back in with Granmore. She didn't always walk the entire stretch of boardwalk, miles of wide wooden planks, usually just enough to get her steps in for the day and tire herself out a bit. She sometimes stopped to chat with store owners and picked up food and water to hand out to some of the unhoused people she'd become friendly with over the years. But mostly, she practiced being alone. People watching by herself didn't feel as good. She kept wanting to point out funny things, but had no one to point them out to. She would stop for coffee or a cherry-flavored Italian ice and force herself to sit on benches or sand dunes instead of heading back to the B&B to clean and do busy work. She didn't like being alone, and that was why she forced herself to take these weekly walks. It was practice, or sometimes she thought maybe it was punishment. Not wanting to be alone was what had made her seek out the Stephs and Ambers of the past, what had made her stay long past when she should have gone. At the bottom of her watering can of sweetness was the shadowy creature fed by her desire to give, loneliness. With her can mostly empty, the creature breached the surface more and more, and was choosing now of all times to do it again. Makeda remembered sitting on the dunes with her mother, Granmore, and Gramps when she was a kid, before they'd found out about Prince Kashan, and all her energy had turned toward containing her mother's obsession. So many years had passed, but sometimes she felt like she was still searching for those perfect days when her biggest worry had been menacing seagulls and not monarchical fantasies. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, and her stomach jolted with a sudden fear that it was her mother. But when she pulled it out, the number from GrabRight showed on the display. Her annoyance surged as she answered, and this time there was no seal on the vault to keep it locked in. "Lindsay? Mac, there's an emergency." "There were never this many emergencies when I worked there," Makeda said. "Wonder what changed, that you're calling me every other day with a new problem." "What?" Lindsay's voice was strained with indignation. "What now?" Makeda asked. "It's just, I'm going through the files, and I think you messed up this spreadsheet tracking seasonal." "I didn't mess anything up," Makeda said. The words just slipped out, instead of her usual placation. She leaned into the satisfaction, much preferring this to having to give her time and energy to someone who didn't deserve it. "You don't know how to use Excel, but you lied on your resume and said you did. That sounds like you messed up." There was a pause, which was understandable, since Makeda had broken script. She was supposed to give in, to just do what needed to be done, even if it wasn't to her benefit. Not today, GrabRight. "Mac, come on. If I don't fix this, the store will suffer, and I don't work there anymore. But if you don't help, there will be trouble this week at the store." Makeda started to slide back into helpy mode, but pulled the emergency brake. I don't work there anymore, and what happens there is no longer my responsibility, she said. Don't call me again unless there's a job opening. Also, you can find Excel tutorials on YouTube. She hung up and stared at the phone in her slightly shaking hand, her ears ringing a bit behind the sound of crashing waves. Guilt surged, but so did an unfamiliar pleasure. She put her foot down without apologizing. Maybe the annoying investigator's presence did have some value. Makeda was learning to say no and mean it, and she'd keep saying no until the Iberonian understood and left. She decided to go somewhere that hadn't been around when she was a kid, given all the memories the princess stuff was pulling up. The Ferris wheel at the steel pier. She hated the Ferris wheel in the summer, with the sticky heat and the pier teeming with people and the line to get on the wheel almost as far back as the boardwalk. Now, in the preseason, before the shore was overrun by tourists, there was a refreshing breeze, and the warmth was dry, not oppressive. The crowds were sparse, and when Makeda got on, she could expect to have a car to herself and not be stuck with a bickering family or amorous couple. From the window of the trendily designed car, she could look out over the wide possibility of the ocean and feel that stirring that had once been familiar to her. She'd lost it, down on the ground where reality had started pressing in on her early and often. But the Ferris wheel lifted her up into that sensation every now and again, the one of being overwhelmed, not with bills or worry for other people and the obligations she'd made to them, but with possibility, with all the places she could imagine out in the world and all the adventures she'd once imagined she'd have. When the ride was over and she placed her feet back on solid ground, she would leave all those fantasies in the air where they belonged. There was no wait when she arrived, and the young white guy who worked there took her ticket and guided her on board. Makeda felt herself unclench as she stepped into the car, ready for approximately 15 minutes of reprieve from a life that had suddenly become a minefield of everyone else's hopes and dreams, and the realization that she didn't really have any of her own. Miss, you have to wait for the next car, the Ferris wheel worker called out from behind Makeda. The next one will be empty. Miss! Makeda's senses pricked as she turned, picking up on Besnaria's chaos vibes, before the aggravating investigator stepped into the car behind her. The woman grinned down at her, and Makeda knew what mice saw last before Kojak sent them on to the great cheese platter in the sky. The tension that had been relieved by shutting Lindsay down clamped her in its vice again. I am but a tourist trying to see a foreign city along the Atlantic, Besnaria said, humming up her accent. This Ferris wheel is said to have a good view that's best enjoyed with good company. Makeda should have jumped out just before the Ferris wheel worker shut the door, like a heroine sliding into an airlock at the climax of an action movie. But Makeda was not final girl material. No matter how much she wanted to change, she was the person who stood there as a xenomorph approached, and perhaps petted the tiny alien tongue and offered it a snack before it disemboweled her. The Ferris wheel started to move, and she sighed, annoyed with herself, and dropped onto one of the benches. Besnaria sat down right beside her, close enough that Makeda could smell the sweet grass scent of her lotion, close enough that anyone watching them would think they were a couple. Besnaria pushed her glasses up, depositing another fingerprint to the smudge menagerie that was killing Makeda softly. Can you even make out the view through those things? Makeda resisted the urge to pull them off and rub them with the microfiber cloth she kept in her purse. You could at least give them a wipe if you're here to see the sights. Besnaria appeared not to be listening. She jumped up, startling Makeda, and started walking all over the car, She examined the railings, stared at stains on the seats, and even did a jumping jack or two, making the car swing back and forth. Then she dropped back onto the bench, even closer to Makeda than she had been. She leaned down in that annoying way tall people had of making it clear that there were a few inches of distance between your shoulder and theirs. "How many people," she asked, "do you think have had sex in here?" "What?" Makeda's voice came out in a high squeak. "Why would you ask that?" "It just seems that when in a small, semi-private space, fornication becomes a challenge of sorts for many people. The Ferris wheel's nature adds the bonus of a time limit to whatever amorous intentions one might have, and the additional bonus of the threat of discovery. How long does a rotation take? 12 to 15 minutes, is it, before that door will open?" She moved her face directly in front of Makeda's and squinted. "Are you coming down with something? Your cheeks are a bit—" "I'm fine." Makeda stared straight ahead, hoping Bez couldn't hear her heart beating wildly or see the sweat gathering at her hairline. Maybe the smudgy glasses would work to her benefit. "I just don't want to think about whether there are sex germs covering the surface of the small metal box I'm stuck in for the next few minutes." Bez leaned back in her seat. "Fine. We can talk about hyperamia." Subtlety was not the investigator's strong point. "We don't have a Ferris wheel like this there. My sister. She works for the Ministry of Tourism. She says they want to build one if the new ceremonial monarchy increases the island's profile. The Ruota Royale. Maybe they could name it the Makeda Royale if you become princess." Makeda's shoulders locked up. "I came here for peace, not to talk about the royalty thing, okay? I can't even relax in my own home because you're there. At least let me have a few minutes to myself." "You don't relax in your own home, though," Besnaria pointed out. "I've seen your to-do list, and it's in no way compatible with relaxation. Doing things is relaxing for me, but not with people looking over my shoulder and constantly trying to offer their advice." She cut Bez a look from the corner of her eye. Besnaria slumped back, spreading her long legs wide. Her suit was a rumpled mess, but it managed to look artfully shabby, even though Makeda knew the wrinkles had formed because Besnaria threw it onto a chair instead of hanging it up. "I'm just making conversation and getting to know you," Besnaria said. "While some investigators might need to rely on the corner your quarry on a Ferris wheel and force your agenda onto them trick, I am above that. Then why did you follow me here?" "I'm implementing a variation, the corner your quarry on a Ferris wheel and flirt with them trick. That is my preferred method in this instance. Has anyone ever told you that you're incredibly annoying?" Makeda bit out, still feeling empowered by hanging up on Lindsay. "Most people don't say it outright, but you did the day we met," Bez said cheerily. "I find it rather refreshing. You'll become accustomed to it, like a sea snail in climate change-warmed seas." Bez didn't seem bothered by the insult. She seemed oddly flattered. Makeda wondered if it was possible for the woman to care about anything but achieving her own objectives. There was something intriguing about Besnaria's single-mindedness when Makeda's life had become so aimless. Besnaria stretched her legs out and then drew them back toward her. Her gaze was out over the ocean. "I haven't been home for 5 years. Makeda looked around for the invisible person who'd asked when the investigator had last been home. and then remembered her superpower of drawing people's sob stories from them just by breathing in their vicinity. She heaved a sigh. The World Federation of Monarchists has headquarters in London, and the travel required has meant not even being there most of the time. Bez continued. I was flirting, but I was also just talking about home, because you're the first person I've been able to talk about it with for some time. Makeda crossed her arms and leaned back. What is that like, never being at home? She didn't want to indulge the investigator, but she was genuinely curious. She'd never left home, and the thought of spending years away made her chest hurt. I try not to think about how it feels, but I would have to say it's been lonely. My family is very close, so I'm happy to be going back. Bez glanced down at Makeda. I'll be happier if you come with me. Makeda's chest grew even tighter. She hated that it was a stranger saying this to her, as a joke to get what she wanted, when none of the people she had longed to hear those words from ever had. They left her behind instead. Why do you care? Does the WFM give you a bonus if you bring me in? Yes, there'd be a small bonus, and it would be helpful considering my contract is up, and I'll have to find new work after this, Besnaria said. But my happiness wouldn't be about the bonus. You saw my tattoo. I am Machet Chevalier. You are an Al-Horadasi. If you are truly Queen Aziz's great-granddaughter, it is my duty to bring you home. My duty to my country and family, and to you. Makeda stared at Bez, dismay roiling her stomach, because this didn't feel like manipulation. The brightness in the investigator's eyes, the set of her jaw and sudden puffing of her chest, that kind of earnestness couldn't be faked. Why is it your duty? Makeda asked. Probably for the same reason you're even entertaining going to Arborania now. Have you read about the disappearance of Queen Ozzy? I did a long time ago, but there are so many different accounts of what happened that I really don't remember. Makeda said. World War II was over, and Iberania had resisted invasion but lost their king. He was the descendant of Lala, right? Besnaria nodded. Yes. He was the first male hereditary heir, but he found the fierce match in Ozzy. Makeda glanced at Besnaria. Most of the stories mentioned that the head of the royal guard was with her when she disappeared. Some said that maybe she, you know. She made a slitting motion across her own neck. I know all about what people say. Bez laughed ruefully. That guard was my grandmother. Oh, my bad. I didn't mean to insinuate that she was a killer. Makeda grasped for something to step this back because while she was leaning into jerkiness, grandmothers were off limits. Besnaria smiled, amused. She was the head of the Royal Iberanian Guard, so she can kill a person in more ways than either of us can imagine. But she didn't turn those skills on the Queen. I know this. I need to bring you back with me so that everyone knows. Makeda rubbed her finger over the fish scale ring. She knew what it felt like to carry the burden of mistakes that weren't yours, and the way the desire to fix them could blot out your own dreams. What would Besnaria be doing if her grandmother hadn't lost a queen? Probably not stalking a random American and trying to drag her back to Arborania. You really believe this? That I'm royalty, and you're what, my bodyguard? She remembered the sensation that had gone through her when she pressed her palm to Besnaria's tattoo. the crackle like lightning passing over her skin. Of course I do. In regular circumstances, I'm not in the habit of pursuing women across the world, even if they do look like you. Makeda's stomach lurched, even though the Ferris wheel continued at its regular pace. I assure you that in regular circumstances, no one pursues women who look like me, domestic or international. Well, that wasn't exactly true. People were able to track her down when they needed something. She could tell Besnaria was looking at her and fought the urge to hunch her shoulders. Ah, so the American romantic films are correct, Bez said, her voice full of amused wonder. Beautiful women really do sit around lamenting how unattractive they are. Do you also trip over random objects and eat pints of ice cream when you're distressed? Makeda inhaled sharply. She was cute. That was what people said if they commented on her looks. And even that was a stretch, given how many people had invested time and energy into making her know she was far from it. But Besnaria had called her beautiful, so casually. You're just saying what sounds good, Makeda said. Besnaria laughed. That is actually one of the few things I'm not skilled at. I'm saying that if you aren't pursued on a regular basis, the circumstances must be irregular. Makeda's resistance began to slip. Could she believe that Besnaria was saying this because she meant it? No. Flattery will get you nowhere, she retorted, inwardly cringing that she couldn't come up with a cooler put-down. I don't flatter you to get myself anywhere, but Besnaria was looking deeply into Makeda's eyes, and that tingling sensation started in her body again. Her gaze dropped to Makeda's mouth, and in the space of that brief ocular movement, the particles between them seemed to burst into millions of microscopic flames. Makeda's libido had already made its appearance known, but for once she had an impulse that seemed driven by greed and greed alone. But what? Are you sure it wouldn't? Bez asked, her voice softer and lower. What wouldn't? The microscopic fire particles seemed to slip out from between them to focus their weight behind Makeda's head, pushing it toward Besnaria's. Besnaria ran her tongue over her lips. Flattery. Would it not get me anywhere with you? Something moved over Makeda's body in a quick velvet wave. Pleasure. That was pleasure. She leaned into it, just as she had with her annoyance with Lindsay. Probably not, but you seem like the type who enjoys a challenge. Their faces were very close now. The sun streaming in through the car's windows showed each individual fingerprint on Besnaria's glasses, but also the clear honey brown of her eyes and the smooth skin of her cheeks and her full lips. Makeda wasn't sure what she was feeling, because she was too busy thinking that she wanted Besnaria Chevalier, chaotic nuisance and attempted life ruiner, to kiss her. It would be okay, here in the air where she allowed herself her fantasies, she reasoned. A princess and her lady knight, the kind of fairy tale she'd always wanted. If she had to be a princess. Not the one her mother had imagined for her. With the way Besnaria was looking at her, gaze full of wonder like she already believed, Makeda could allow herself to believe too, even if just for the remainder of a Ferris wheel ride. Their lips were a breath apart when Makeda's senses crashed into her like a wave raising sandcastles at the beach. The heated particles surrounding them fizzled out. She pressed her lips together as she pulled out of the 45-degree angle that had brought her so close to Besnaria's mouth. Besnaria blinked, then jerked her gaze back to the ocean. She added at least 4 more smudges to her glasses as she pushed them up, even when they reached the summit of the slope of her nose. I suppose I shouldn't flatter myself either. No, you shouldn't. It didn't matter. Besnaria was going to be gone soon, and Makeda's life would go back to how it usually was. That was what she wanted. The usual. She peeked at Besnaria without turning her head. I must admit that it's hard not to think about having sex in a Ferris wheel car when I'm not talking about Iberania and not flattering either you or myself, Besnaria said, as if she'd felt Makeda's glance. Are you sure I shouldn't continue with one of those topics as a distraction from the sex thoughts? Oh my God, fine. Makeda huffed in disbelief. Talk about Iberania all you want. Iberania. Right. Let's go with that. Besnaria sounded slightly disappointed. Well, the reason they want to restart the monarchy is to promote tourism, but also to cultivate a sense of national pride and to spark interest in our rich history. Shouldn't you find someone from the island then? So it's not some outsider coming in? Makeda asked, despite her resolution not to get involved in this mess. Like, if you work somewhere and they promote someone from within, it's more inspiring than just bringing in some random person. There are all kinds of ways you could have your new monarchy without involving me, a person who's never set foot on the island and wouldn't have the slightest idea of what to do as its princess. I believe that was another proposition, Besnaria said, but it's a much less exciting news story than finding a long-lost heir halfway across the globe, wouldn't you say? Makeda couldn't argue with that. Tell me why you don't want to be involved, Besnaria said. You won't have to do the hard work of making laws and all of that. You'd just be a figurehead. Haven't you given any thought to the ways this might benefit you? Even if it's just having a bit of fun. Makeda's irritation flared up. Yes, she had. She'd once thought that being a princess would be an amazing adventure until she'd been made aware that princess adventures weren't designed with girls like her in mind. The thought of being paraded out in front of a group of people, of how they would laugh when they were told she was their princess, wasn't her idea of fun. It made her jaw tense up and her shoulder muscles tight. That's the girl who thinks she's a princess? Her? She gripped the bench seat with her fingertips. Why don't you figure that out yourself, Miss Top 10 Investigator? I said we could talk about Iberania, not me. Very well, though I'd prefer to talk more about you. Besnaria launched into more facts about the island, and Makeda chatted politely until the ride came to a stop. When the door to the Ferris wheel car opened and they stepped back onto the solid ground of Steel Pier, her resolve hadn't changed. I'm going to take care of something. Don't follow me. All right, Besnaria said easily, too easily, and then turned and walked in the opposite direction. Makeda kept looking back over her shoulder, and when she arrived at the other end of the boardwalk, where she'd walked aimlessly, she was furious. Not at Besnaria, who hadn't followed her, but at the fact that she was a little disappointed by it. Makeda slunk back home that evening in time to hear a shriek from the kitchen. She ran in, heart thumping in her chest, to find Besnaria spinning pizza dough in an elaborate routine for Grandmore's enjoyment. It was like a scene straight from the fantasies of how she'd imagined family fun nights could be. How things had been when her grandfather was still alive and her mother hadn't fallen into the abyss of royal obsession. She'd always tried to integrate her girlfriends into her life with Grandmore, but most of them found it frustrating that she wanted to spend so much time with her. Now here was Bez, having a casual hang with the old woman. It didn't help matters that she was in slacks and her button-down shirt, looking like the living embodiment of Makeda's dream woman. Shirt sleeves rolled, forearms artfully dusted with flour, and strong hands working that dough in a way that let Makeda know that if she'd given in to her urges in the Ferris wheel, it would have been the best 10 minutes of her sexual life. "Dinner's almost ready," Besnaria said easily, as if she were an old friend of the family and not a total stranger who had forced herself into their lives. "I'm making my dad's homemade pizza. After tasting a slice on the boardwalk, I thought maybe you'd like to see what you're missing out on. Iberania has the best pizza in the world." Bez's familiarity and the reminder of why she was being so friendly forced Makeda back on the defense. Staying out all day had achieved nothing because the stress and confusion caused by Besnaria's presence resumed from where she'd left them, like she'd returned to a video game save point. "I was going to cook," Makeda said stiffly. She stopped in the entryway next to Kojak, who knew better than to involve himself in kitchen business and was sulking as his gaze tracked the spinning pizza disc. "I thought you decided you were being selfish now. Cooking for other people isn't selfish, is it?" Grandmore asked. "Besides, your pizza is always dry. The crust gets stuck all up in my throat." Grandmore was still mad at Makeda, it seemed. "Okay," Makeda said. "I'll go set the table while you two have your pizza-making date." "I already said it," Bez said cheerily. "Why don't you sit? I can pour you a glass of wine." Makeda frowned, hating the parts of her that wanted wine and wanted Besnaria to be the one to pour it. Grandmore cooked for her all the time, but she couldn't remember the last time someone she was capable of having impure thoughts about on a Ferris wheel had tried to wine and dine her. "She has an agenda," she reminded herself. "She told you flat out that she does." "No thanks," she said coolly. "There's silverware to—" "Did it," Bez said. Grandmore glanced at Makeda with a pained expression. "A tall, fine woman who does all the chores is cooking for us and offering you wine, and you're sitting there pouting instead of locking that down. I have failed in my duties as your grandmother." Makeda rolled her eyes and then leaned against the doorway, standing beside Kojak as they both watched Besnaria work. "What am I supposed to do now?" Makeda sniped. "Just sit around?" "That's an option. Do you ever do that?" Besnaria asked. "Just sitting around is the least relaxing thing I could imagine," Makeda said. Doing things kept her occupied and made her feel useful. If she wasn't useful, then what was left? She shifted against the wood, standing up a bit straighter. "Ah, some people are like that, I suppose. How was your day?" Besnaria asked as she effortlessly spun a disc of dough. "After our turn on the Ferris wheel." The spinning disc wobbled. Makeda wouldn't have noticed if she wasn't staring at it so hard to avoid looking at Makeda's flour-dusted forearms and strong hands. "Fine," Makeda said, and then because it felt too rude not asking, "How was yours?" "It was excellent. I went to the arcade where I won many prizes. I also stopped in at a casino to try a slot machine." She frowned as she worked the dough. "I had a slight altercation with a worker who tried to blame me for breaking the arm off a slot machine. I told them that it wasn't my fault, that they use machines that rely on pressing a button, but they still attached an arm to pull. Makeda pressed her lips together, refusing to laugh, though she could fully imagine Besnaria wielding a slot machine arm like a sword as she made a daring escape through the casino floor. Bez sighed. I may be on some kind of casino's most wanted list, so I'll have to lay low until I leave. Makeda took the opportunity to reassert her rudeness. Great, so you're heading to Arborania soon? Besnaria should have been annoyed by this, but the look she tossed over her shoulder was not only indulgent, it was familiar. As if after just a few days, Besnaria already had Makeda's number. Like they were friends. Like this whole comfortable scene wasn't just an act to make Makeda lower her defenses. And like Besnaria had meant it when she'd said, I'll be happier if you come with me. We are, Bez said without the slightest bit of doubt, and Makeda pushed off the door frame and stalked off. She'd meant to head to her room, but ended up going to the dining room to straighten Bez's place settings, and then sitting because she wouldn't hide anymore after wandering around the entire day. If that meant she had to share dinner with the investigator, she'd survived worse. Makeda held on to her coolness as the pizza was served and wine was poured, and even as she tussled with Besnaria, who tried to tuck a napkin into Makeda's collar, she held on as if her life depended on it. Because it did. She'd faltered in the Ferris wheel, but she had to be steadfast against the pull of the investigator's chaotic charms. It was the only way to keep herself safe. The pizza, with a spicy homemade tomato sauce, perfect crust, and delicious mixture of mozzarella, parmigiana, and halloumi, was the second best she'd ever tasted. But she didn't compliment the chef. She didn't join in the dinner conversation, even when Besnaria and Granmore talked about their travels, and she had questions about places like Ghana and Italy and London. Granmore loosened up and tried to prod Makeda into joining the discussion by talking about her charity work, but eventually rolled her eyes and gave up after getting grunts in response. Besnaria talked about her job at the WFM and made it sound mysterious and intriguing, but didn't look directly at Makeda over the course of dinner. Makeda sipped her wine and wondered why her newfound boundaries felt even lonelier than giving everything for nothing. After dinner, Besnaria went to her room, likely to look up more ways to annoy Makeda, and Granmore took her tablet to the living room to video chat with her friend in Georgia. Makeda opened her email on her phone, but when she saw the numerous volunteer requests that marked the start of summer, she sighed and put it away. She still wanted to help, but the strangest fear seized her, that if she agreed to do one thing, she had to agree to do them all. It had been the same at work and in her relationships, the same with her mother. Makeda felt guilty about not responding, but her near-empty inner watering can left her without the energy to do more. When the B&B's phone rang, she jogged over to the reception desk to answer it, glad for something to do besides feel sorry for herself. Golden Crown Bed and Breakfast, Makeda speaking. How may I help you? Hey, Kada. It's me. Her mother's voice speaking in that familiar but tentative tone she'd been using since Makeda was a teenager. The hoarse strain of someone who'd messed up, speaking around the enormity of what had happened, instead of just hocking up something more than a trite apology. You doing good? Hey, Mom. Makeda heard the flutter of panic in her voice and swallowed. I'm okay. What's up? You don't usually call this late. My mother told me about the investigator, Ashley Hicks said with a tight laugh. Makeda hated that laugh. It was more of a vocal tick than an expression of amusement. Kind of funny that they ignored me for years, but now apparently someone just showed up on the doorstep looking for you. More tight laughter. Yeah, Makeda said bleakly. Funny. Her mom cleared her throat. I debated about whether to talk to you about this, prayed on it with Bill, and I wasn't always a good mother, but I'm still yours, and I wanted to see how you were doing. Makeda sighed. You mean, see what I'm going to do? A pause, a guilty chuckle. I guess that too. Fear filled Makeda with a fizzy dread, like when someone knocked over a soda display at the grab right, pushing at the cap of her calm. Her mother sounded off in a way that she hadn't for years. And even though Makeda was a grown-up now, it was terrifying to finally let herself imagine all the ways in which Besnaria Chevalier's arrival might send her mother careening back into obsession. Their shared secret that had once filled Makeda with joy had played out like a fairy tale. But the ones where the protagonists ruined their lives chasing what wasn't meant for them instead of being happy with what they had. Her mother had thought herself a Cinderella, but she'd been the evil stepmother, willing to sacrifice anything to the altar of royal recognition, even her daughter. And now here she was, dipping her toe back into the obsession that had ruined both of their lives. It wouldn't be smart or healthy to get involved with this, for either of us, Makeda said firmly. I know that this kind of thing isn't for me. I've had years to think on it, and even more to come to that conclusion. And we know what happened with you last time. You don't need to be thinking or praying on this. You need to forget it and focus on the good stuff you have going on in your life right now. There was a pause, and then her mother launched into her sales pitch, a familiar, aggressive frustration in her tone. It's just, the princess stuff isn't that big of a deal, is it? Things are different now. You're grown, and nobody's gonna tease you. Mom, couldn't you use the money? The chance to get out and see the world? It's not like you have anything tying you down. Having something that should have tied her down hadn't stopped her mother from doing what she wanted, but Makeda didn't say that. Let's not talk about this, Makeda said. We haven't for years, and when we did before, it never ended well. I just don't think you're thinking this through, her mother pushed, ignoring Makeda's request. This is what we wanted, isn't it? All those trips to the consulate, all our research. And I know you're not religious, but if this is happening now, don't you think that means it's meant to happen? Why turn away a blessing? We have different ideas of blessing, Makeda replied, trying to keep her cool as heat pressed at the corners of her eyes. This is more like a curse to me. One that had faded away but clearly had not been broken. There was a long pause. Are you rejecting this because you think it'll hurt me? Her mother asked in a small voice. I did wonder how you'd feel, Makeda admitted, tapping her toe against the wood siding of the desk. Since you were the one who cared about being a princess, but that's not... No. I mean, are you refusing to follow up on this as some kind of revenge against me? Her mother asked, and Makeda felt the question like a fist in the stomach. Are you throwing this chance away because you still haven't forgiven me for the difficulties we went through all those years ago? You think I'm the kind of daughter who would do something explicitly to hurt you? Makeda's voice was rough and incredulous, and she tried to even out the troughs of pain. After everything, that's what you think of me? A tremor moved through her and didn't stop, leaving her shaking with rage. She'd never done anything but help her mother, listened to her daydreams, supported her when everyone else watched her fall apart just because there might be a damn tiara waiting for her in some far-off land, and then helped pick up the pieces. No one bothered to check if Makeda had any fractures herself. She was supposed to just go on as if nothing had happened. She hadn't even been a burden afterward by asking for money or time or attention or an apology. And now she was being accused of being the one causing pain? She wasn't sure she'd ever been so angry. Usually she stuffed it all down, but it wouldn't stay where it was supposed to. All her usually repressed feelings finally pushed politeness out of the driver's seat. "I can't believe you would say that to me," Makeda bit out. "Forgiving you doesn't mean I need to go on some wild quest after a heritage I don't even care about. But the fact that you think it does isn't surprising. You always put this imaginary royal version of me ahead of the real me, who just wanted you to... Makeda clamped her mouth shut. She was angry, but she still had that internal shutdown valve that stopped her from hurting someone too badly. She didn't know what her mother would do if she heard the unvarnished truth, that Makeda had just wanted her to be a good mother, that she still wanted her to. "No, that came out wrong. I didn't mean," her mother sighed. "I always mess everything up when I try to be close with you. It's something that should connect us, but look, I just don't want you doing anything to hurt yourself because you want to hurt me. The only time I hurt myself was helping you. But thanks for your newfound concern," Makeda said, not recognizing the acid in her tone. "I'll let you go, baby," her mother said in that tired, forlorn way that would keep Makeda up later when the guilt set in. "Didn't want to bother you or bring up the past. Just wanted you to think about your future. Trust that I am. I've always been the one thinking and planning for the future in this family, because if I didn't, no one else would. Bye, Mom," Makeda said, then sighed and added, "Love you. Love you too." Makeda placed the portable phone on the cradle, blinking away tears of frustration. She was supposed to see this princess thing as a gift, a blessing. It was a curse that would never loosen its grip on her family, that could surge up and destroy everything. Hearing that thread of hope in her mother's voice made the precariousness of the situation much too real. This chapter of the obsessive fairy tale needed to be closed permanently, and she would do the closing. She scraped together the rudeness she'd been cultivating as she marched up the stairs, and then knocked loudly on Besnaria's door. She'd barely removed her hand when the door swung open. The investigator, still dressed in her slacks and dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, took a step forward, leaned against the door frame, and looked down at her. Her hair was tucked behind her ears, and her eyes were more serious than Makeda had expected, behind her smudgy glasses lenses. Makeda regretted having installed the vintage light bulbs that threw a soft, luminous highlight over Besnaria's cheekbones and full mouth. "I thought you didn't want to be bothered. But here you are at a strange woman's door just before bedtime." Besnaria's grin spread slowly, revealing the gap in her teeth, but her gaze was still probing. "Did you change your mind about being tucked in, or did you need something else?" "What I need to know is when you're leaving," Makeda said. "This is getting out of hand." "What exactly is out of hand about my staying?" "You're a stranger." "In a strange land, yes," Besnaria mused. "Though a kind woman did tolerate my presence for at least 15 minutes today." Makeda flexed her fingers in agitation. "You showed up out of nowhere trying to convince me to go to Iberania, and now you're just here fixing things and chatting with Grandmore and following me out to the boardwalk, and almost kissing me on Ferris wheels," her brain unhelpfully added. "This is way out of hand. Do you only allow people you know to pay or barter for a room? That doesn't seem like a very sound business plan." Makeda gritted her teeth. "Can you just tell me why you're here?" If the investigator left, Makeda could tell her mother there had been a mistake, that they'd found out Kashan had just been some dude from South Jersey running a grift to get women into bed. She hated lying, but she would do anything to prevent her mother from backsliding, and Ashley Hicks was currently at the tipping point. Vesnoria wiggled her nose as if resettling her glasses. I believe I've been quite clear about why I'm here. I mean, why you're still here. Why you think you can convince me to go with you when I said no. Her neck hurt from glaring up at Vesnoria, but she refused to take a few steps back or go get a step stool. I can't be that important to you as a princess prospect. Can't you just grab someone off the street? What's the difference? Vesnoria tilted her head to the side in that owlish move that Makeda found simultaneously endearing and enraging. If I were hypothetically capable of grabbing someone off the street, perhaps by injecting them with a sedative or slipping one into food I had prepared for them, Makeda swallowed hard and wondered if she should have eaten that fourth slice of pizza as she pretended to ignore the dinner conversation. If I were going to expend the tremendous energy that goes into the takedown and legally questionable transport of another human, I would be quite sure to grab the person I believe to be the actual heir. That's you. Are you suggesting I grab you, sea snail? Vesnoria asked the disturbing question in a benign tone, but her mischievous gaze was a warm caress against Makeda's skin. You know that's not what I'm suggesting, Makeda said, ignoring the nickname and the throb of expectation at the idea of Vesnoria touching her, pulling her close. That's too bad, because I will do what you ask of me, within reason, Vesnoria replied. Makeda pushed through the haze of innuendo. You mean if it fits your agenda? I've asked you to leave 20 times and you haven't. Leaving behind the probable heir when my mission is to find the probable heir isn't reasonable, Vesnoria said, pushing up her glasses, adding another smudge to the collection that had been paining Makeda since Vesnoria's arrival, and something in her snapped. This was one irritation that could be easily remedied, unlike the 99 other problems in her life. Hand over your glasses, Makeda said. Vesnoria whipped them off and handed them over without question. Apparently, this request was reasonable. Makeda marched over to the side table in the hallway, pulled out a microfiber cloth to swipe over the lenses, and then marched back. When she got to Vesnoria, she didn't just hand the glasses over. She walked right up to her, close enough to feel the heat of her body, and reached out with both hands to place the glasses onto her face. She told herself that she was exhibiting her dominance like an animal nipping at an interloper's ear to remind it of its place in the hierarchy. The problem was that if she were acting on pure animal instinct, she wouldn't have wanted to chase Vesnoria away. The investigator was stock still as Makeda placed the glasses on her face, except for the deep rise and fall of her chest. Her exhale was a brush of warmth against the skin on Makeda's inner elbow, and that warmth spread through her, mixing with all the confusing and conflicting feelings the strange woman inspired. She started to pull her hands away, but Vesnoria reached up to catch her wrists and hold them in place. What are you doing? Makeda asked, trying to sound annoyed, but the word came out husky and low. She could feel the race of her pulse where Vesnoria's fingertips pressed lightly against the sensitive skin at her inner wrists. I'm adjusting, Vesnoria said, blinking at her. Do you know why I don't clean my glasses often? To torture me? Makeda asked. No, but that is duly noted as an effective method of torture. Vesnoria tilted her head a little, her grip on Makeda's wrist tightening a fraction and then loosening. It's because there is a tiny bit of magic in the moment when my glasses go from dirty to clean, where everything is crisp and clear and beautiful. If what had happened on the Ferris wheel was a mere kiss, Makeda didn't know what to call this. She'd never thought dirty glasses talk was her kink, but she was discovering new things about herself all the time. Every part of her wanted Besnaria to pull her into the room and close the door, to pull her into the bed and fuck her until she couldn't think, couldn't care about Iberania or her mother or any of the mess of the past that was trying to drag her back in, even though Bez was the epicenter of that mess's resurgence. If you cleaned them more often, you could have those moments all the time. Makeda somehow managed, not even sure she was making sense. Besnaria leaned close to Makeda's ear. I'm very good at denying myself pleasure. I find it makes it much more satisfying when I finally give in. What about you? I'm good at denying myself, but I've never given in, Makeda said in a low voice. Try it, Besnaria urged, and this was one thing Makeda wouldn't say no to. Instead of overthinking, she tilted her mouth toward Besnaria's and went for it, just as Besnaria did the same. It was wonderful for the millisecond that their lips brushed, that spark jumping between them again, and the anticipation of what was to come making her lightheaded. Unfortunately, all of the need throbbing through Makeda that had propelled the impulsive motion didn't allow her to pump the brakes in time. Her bottom lip smashed right into Besnaria's front teeth, the sudden pain pulling her to her senses just in time for regret to flood in. She pulled away from Besnaria, bringing her hands to her mouth. Ow! Her tongue swept over the ragged cut on her inner lip, and she tasted iron. Besnaria was looking down at her, eyes wide and hand over her own mouth. Oh, God! Makeda whispered again, this time in humiliation. Of course she'd busted her own lip while trying to be sexy and impulsive. It was better this way. She definitely should not be kissing this woman, and maybe some higher being was making that clear. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have. I'm sorry. Besnaria moved her lips back and forth and shrugged. I'm fine. What about you? Are you hurt? She raised a hand toward Makeda's face. Let me see. Makeda jerked back, her hand-eye coordination suddenly spectacular. Why? So you can see how ridiculous I am with your new 4D vision? So you can laugh at my swollen lip? I'm fine. She dropped her gaze to the ground and stared at Besnaria's sock-clad feet, then sighed and lowered her hands. Besnaria didn't touch her face, but she knew the woman was examining her from a few feet away. Put some ice on it. Makeda rolled her eyes. I know. She'd marched upstairs to finally take control of the situation, and somehow this was the result. Standing like a fool with a self-inflicted injury, while replaying the moment she'd crashed mouth first into Besnaria over and over again. Who laughed at you? Besnaria asked quietly. Who made you think you were laughable? Makeda didn't think she could be any more embarrassed, but now Besnaria felt sorry for her. It wasn't as if the taunts from the past suddenly filled her head, but the shame that she had felt then returned. As did the shame she felt for never having moved past the bullying and having somehow invited it. And having supported her mother for all these years only to be asked if she was trying to spite her. At having tried to kiss the woman who'd brought all this back up to the surface. It doesn't matter, Makeda said, taking a few steps back and shoving her hands into her pockets. It does, Besnaria said, frowning. They've made my goals much more difficult to obtain. Of course that was why she wanted to know. Her regret sharpened into a spike of humiliation. Thanks for your concern. Makeda started to walk to her room. Hypothetically, Besnaria called out behind her. If I were hypothetically capable of grabbing someone off the street, and engaging in certain activities that are legally gray, but morally righteous, like explaining to someone how wrong they were to laugh at a young girl for thinking she might be a princess. Having their names might make such a hypothetical task easier. Makeda whirled around. Wait, are you telling me that leaving me alone is unreasonable, but tracking down my bullies over a decade later isn't? That's ridiculous. Yes, Besnaria said. She was still again, but not in anticipation as she had been a moment ago. This was the stillness of repressed motion. It's quite reasonable. I have a rubric, and it falls dead in the reason zone. There isn't a statute of limitations on making someone aware of their bad behavior. If it's still hurting you all of these years later, why shouldn't they hurt a bit too? Makeda's throat went rough. Her mother and even Grandma made it seem like Makeda should just move on, leave the past in the past. The fact that her mother thought she was trying to get revenge for said past had made her feel ill. Besnaria was here, ready to roll up on Tanya Smith from third period algebra, who probably didn't even remember Makeda had ever existed, and show her what's what because she didn't think it was bad to make people pay for hurting you. Pleasure worked its way into her system, not sexual, but a kind of light, all-over tingling, as if Bez's words had just exfoliated away a layer of Makeda's distress. She's just trying to win you over. Are you really this gullible? Maybe a little, if not enough for Bez to get what she wanted. Please don't go legally ambiguous on any of my old classmates, Makeda said. Classmates, Besnaria said. I see. And you went to Atlantic City High School. I'm serious, Makeda said. Don't. Besnaria sighed, as if not being allowed to track down and harass Makeda's tormentors was the pinnacle of unfairness, and then nodded. Fine. Is there anything else you need? Makeda briefly allowed herself to think of how a careless and selfish person might respond to a beautiful woman framed seductively against the backdrop of a four-poster bed, asking what they needed. The desire that kept getting mixed up with her newfound anger flared in her again. She ran her tongue over the painful cut in her mouth and thought about all the things that could be done that didn't require use of her own mouth. Kato, who was on the phone? Was it your mother again? Most careless and selfish people thinking about seduction weren't in their grandmother's house, and Makeda was grudgingly glad that she was. If not, she might have been all in on whatever honeypot ruse Besnaria was trying to pull with her. Good night, she said to the still staring investigator. Hopefully you'll be gone tomorrow. That depends on you, Besnaria replied and shut the door, leaving Makeda in the dark hallway. When she opened her own door, she noticed something hanging on the doorknob and remembered Bez mentioning winning a prize at the boardwalk. God, it was probably a princess plushie or a tiara, or it was a scrunchie with a little plush snail on it, and it made Makeda's sour mood start to rise when it should have made it plummet. Besnaria was right, Makeda realized. This did depend on her. She was already giving in to the call of chaos, Ibarani edition. She'd come upstairs to kick the investigator out, but ended up sharing personal information and almost losing a tooth instead. This was over. No more cleaning glasses or getting Action Park in the panties from the overtures of a woman trying to seduce her into giving in. She was definitely getting rid of Besnaria Chevalier and closing the door on the princess situation once and for all. Chapter 7. As she lay on her back under the kitchen sink trying to remove a rusted lug nut, Bez gained a new item for her rotating list of sureties. Home repair was a punishment sent from the abyss, despite all of the American TV shows that tried to make it look like fun. She was adequate at making small repairs, but the things she'd been working on were a bit above her pay grade. She fervently hoped nothing she fixed ended up costing more due to Bez's handiwork. She was at least sure that the roof tiling she'd pulled up had been replaced correctly. She was willing to repair every leaky pipe and cracked wall in the Golden Crown if it helped convince Makeda to return to Iberania with her. Bez had just finalized how they would get there. Working with a negative travel budget and lack of WFM support, and she was more than satisfied at what she'd managed to pull together. Apart from her desire to restore her family's honor, Bez wasn't one for long-term planning. She generally leapfrogged from idea to idea, hoping she'd landed on lily pads large enough to support the weight of her current goal. She'd succeeded with finding a route home. But after her previous day with Makeda, with one near kiss and one bumbled one, she was beginning to wonder if she'd made a mishap. The Iberanian house music playing in her wireless earphones suddenly shifted to the sound of an incoming call. For a second, Bez thought it was part of the song. Then she fumbled with her phone in her pocket and pressed the button to accept the call. "Besnaria Chevalier at your service?" she said, returning to her work on the pipe. "Yes, I know this," a gravelly and slightly aggrieved voice said. "I gave you this name, and I called the number to speak to you. Of course, it's Besnaria Chevalier. You think I don't know this?" Bez almost jumped up and hit her head against the pipe, but she slid out from under the sink instead, sitting in a crouch as she had when she was a girl listening to Henna Jetta's stories. "Oh, it's you," Bez said. "I wish I hadn't picked up. You know I hate it when you call. It's terrible." "Well, I love talking on the phone as much as I hate you," Henna Jetta laughed. "I hate you too, Henna," Bez said, her chest warm. Bez was the only one of Jetta's grandchildren who still played the love-hate reversal game with her. Everyone else found it exasperating, trying to figure out whether the old woman was joking or not. But Bez and her Henna always understood each other. Almost always. Except when it came to Bez's unrelenting fascination with the past glory of the Chet Chevaliers. "I'm calling because that man has been sticking his nose around here," Henna Jetta said. "Hog Higgs, your boss." "What?" Bez's brow creased. "He called you?" She was somewhat surprised. She had skipped out on her return flight home to follow up on Ora Hicks's email, despite having been told not to. But her calls and emails to the WFM had been going ignored for days. "A person can't stick their nose through the phone, Bezzy, come on," Henna Jetta scoffed. "He came here to our house, talking down to me like I haven't bled better men than him on the end of my blade." Bez's hands froze on the wrench. "Why did he come to the house? To look for me?" "He said you didn't return to London and that you were officially classified as missing in action. And me, what did I think? That this starfish brain granddaughter of mine just emailed me a selfie from New Jersey. But I didn't tell him that." Henna Jetta paused. "I didn't tell him about anything. He kept asking about IZ too. And the day she disappeared, I told him he could read my official report since I'm old and can't remember. The idea of Algernon Shrop's Bottomshire Borough. interrogating her grandmother, a woman he wasn't fit to dust sand from, and a warrior who'd fought invaders to preserve Iberania, while the Higgins family had reaped the spoils of war in its temporary kingdom, made Bez consider leaving for Iberania immediately, just to demand a duel. "I will talk to him," she said tightly, "and tell him to back off." How she would manage to talk to him when he wasn't answering her calls was something she'd have to figure out, but this had gone too far now. "It's not just him," Henajetta said, aggrieved. "Everyone is asking now that they started this campaign. I'd made my peace with the dishonor and these urchins clinging to old grudges, but now even the young people are starting to come up with theories on their social media. John came to ask me if it was true that I killed the queen." Bez had never doubted her grandmother, but she was an investigator. She understood why other people did. Her grandmother was the only witness to the queen's disappearance, and her explanation was too vague, even for Bez. "Hannah," Bez said, "it's okay. People don't blame you. They just don't understand that you would never do that." "Yes, they do, and even if they don't, I blame me," Henajetta said. Her voice didn't waver, it didn't rise, and it was the strength in her tone that shook Bez. Her grandmother was putting effort into staying composed, which meant that she was more distraught than Bez had ever heard her. "Everything will be okay," Bez said awkwardly, not knowing exactly how to console anyone, but particularly not the toughest woman in the known world. It was Henajetta who taught her to fight, both the stylized battle of the Royal Guard and the desperate no-holds-barred style of the Iberanian dogs. She taught Bez how to wield a sword, a knife, and any sharp object within reach. But those skills couldn't help stop gossip. They were the reason for the gossip. When a woman is known for her deadly skill and her ward goes missing, people only remembered how many ways she knew to kill someone. Not that she'd honed those skills under an oath to protect. "I'll fix everything," she said. "I promise." "Ah, here we go. I know things are bad when I get pity for my grandchild who was just in diapers." Henajetta sighed. "My Bessie, there's nothing for you to fix. I have told you this since you were small. My burden is not yours, understand?" Bez rolled her shoulders. "And I have told you since I was small that I will never let you carry this alone. I'm not small anymore, Henajetta. I will help." Bez heard footsteps coming down the hallway, light and cautious, the tread of a person always on the verge of hopping up to do things for others. Except for me. "You think you can beat me or something, talking to me like this? You're soft, with all these promises. I will have you on your ass and a knife at your throat before you know what hits you." Henajetta's voice was disgruntled, but in her usual way, so Bez allowed herself to chuckle in relief. "I have to go, but don't worry," Bez said. "Don't forget that a chevalier never breaks a promise." She'd bring Makeda back home with her and prove Henajetta was innocent. "What does that mean, Bezzy? You know I hate this nonsense mystery talk. And what are you doing in New Jersey?" "Picking up a souvenir for you," Besnaria said, as Makeda walked in, chin up and bristling with a renewed aura of annoyance. "Bezzy, see you soon." She disconnected her call, then tugged out her earphones and tucked them into her pocket. She was still troubled by her grandmother's distress, but the sooner she talked Makeda into going, the sooner Henajetta would feel better. "Bon mère," she called out to Makeda, receiving a grunt in response. Ora Hicks kept trying to convince Bez that her granddaughter was a soft-spoken person who hated confrontation and could be easily convinced, which matched what Bez's own background check had pulled. But one reason Bez always tried to do her investigations in person was that data and secondhand accounts often had only a slight correlation to reality. Makeda was stubborn, at least when interacting with Bez. She had softened during their previous encounters the day before, but she was back to active antagonism now. Good. Bez wanted to spar after hearing about Higgins Shoggins visiting her home, and she could take a few verbal jabs from Makeda as a distraction. "I'm surprised you're not a morning person," Bez said. "Your grandmother keeps telling me you're kind and thoughtful and selfless, like some kind of Disney prince." Makeda fixed her with an icy glare. "Ah, like a person who enjoys waking up early to sing to birds and feed stray kittens." Bez lay back down to get at the resistant nut under the sink, gripping the wrench hard. "You don't have to be a morning person to do those things," Makeda grumbled as she stomped an unnecessary circle around Bez's outstretched legs. "Who wears a suit to fix pipes?" "I do," Bez said. "Do you prefer I wear something else?" Bez asked. "I don't care what you wear, and I don't care if you ruin it," Makeda said. Bez smirked as her wrench slid off the lug nut yet again. "You cared about my glasses enough to take them off and clean them yourself. It's only reasonable to assume you care as much about my clothes." Bez stopped fidgeting with the wrench. "Not that I'm implying you would take my clothes off to clean them like you did my glasses. Though if my jacket is any indication, your first instinct is to rip the clothing from my body." A loud grinding sound filled the kitchen, and the scent of coffee mingled with the slightly moldy under-sink smell. "I could take it off," Bez mused loudly, speaking over the noise of the coffee grinder, "but that would mean working in my underwear. Your grandmother did invite me to treat the Golden Crown as my home while I'm here. I understand that Americans are very prudish about that sort of thing." The pulses of the grinder became one continuous drone. Makeda seemed determined to ignore her, and Bez didn't like it for reasons that had nothing to do with her need to bring Makeda back with her. "How is your mouth?" Bez called out even more loudly. "Is your lip healing okay?" The coffee grinder apparently had more settings than Bez's favorite vibrator, because the noise grew even louder. The coffee had to be so fine it was no longer visible to the human eye at this point. The grinder finally stopped. "I'm sorry about that. I shouldn't have just—" "It was fine," Bez said, wrinkling her nose as rust flaked down on her arm from the lug nut that refused to budge. She probably should have given up on this repair, but a Chet Chevalier didn't stop just because something was impossible. "Well, not you splitting your lip, but the intention was perfectly understandable. I'm rather hard to resist." She waited for a cutting response, and when she didn't get one, looked out from under the sink, catching a glimpse of Makeda's bare legs. Dainty feet, solid ankles, thick calves. Bez's view cut off at the hem of the yellow shorts hugging the smooth brown skin of Makeda's thighs and the hint of cheek beneath them. Above all that, she already knew there was the flare of wide hips, the curve of a belly, and— Bez tore her gaze away and focused on the lug nut, redirecting her energy toward the task at hand and not the ass that made her think, damn. Bez wasn't one to abide by rules, but Makeda was technically off limits to her by the rules she'd set for herself. And if Makeda was truly the heir, by the blood oath sworn by Chet Chevaliers through the ages. Still, even a stone-cold dame of the guard couldn't ignore that Makeda Hicks was thicker than a bowl of henna jetta seaweed stew. And they had almost kissed twice. And Bez wouldn't mind if it almost or actually happened again, even if it was another semi-headbutt. "Let's not talk about it anymore," Makeda said. "All right," Bez said, "though as you learned yesterday, telling me not to think about something makes me think about it all the more." Makeda stepped over Besnaria to place something in the sink, and when Bez looked out from under the sink, she saw that she was between Makeda's thighs. The lug nut she had been loosening suddenly twisted free, ricocheting in the confined space of the cabinet as the pipe came loose and drenched her in cold, stagnant water. "Mutana Mindu!" Bez spluttered as her reflexes kicked in. She dropped the wrench and slid out from under the sink, landing on her knees right in front of Makeda for the second time since her arrival. When she swiped the sink water from her speckled lenses and looked up, Makeda was watching her with wide eyes. She held a polka-dotted dish towel in her hands, which she was wringing reflexively. "Your shirt is drenched." It was among the more civil things the woman had said to her in the last 4 days, but there was nothing civil in the way she stared. Bez's wet shirt clung to her chest, and Makeda's gaze followed suit. A new surety rotated in. When a beautiful woman looked at you like this, it meant trouble. And this wasn't the first time Makeda Hicks had looked at her like this. "It is, indeed, with unpleasant-smelling pipe water. Maybe I will have to work in my underwear." Bez plucked at the top button of her shirt, and Makeda squealed and threw the towel into her face. Bez was slightly disappointed she hadn't thrown herself again, but a towel was useful. "Wait," Makeda said. "We sell t-shirts. I'll bring one for you." Bez pulled the towel off her face in time to watch Makeda and her perfectly fitting shorts jog out of the kitchen, her long locks bouncing against her back. She returned a minute later holding a black cotton shirt. She held it up, the length of it reaching her mid-thigh. In yellow words emblazoned on black, it said Golden Crown B&B, with 3 small crowns stacked next to B&B. "I think this is the right size," she said as she handed Bez the shirt. "This is quite stylish, thank you." Bez pulled her promised knife from her pants pocket, flipped it open with a flick of her wrist, and stabbed it through the shirt's fabric. "What are you doing?" Makeda squealed, stepping back. "You're very excitable when you stop scowling," Bez noted, then tuned Makeda out as she worked, paying attention to the path of the sharp blade. When she was done, she held up the 2 sleeves she'd just removed, making sure to flex her biceps as she did. "You see what my arms look like. If I'm not wearing a suit, I might as well give them breathing room. I'm going to remove my wet shirt now. Avert your eyes if you wish." Makeda hurried over to the coffee machine as Bez unbuttoned and removed her shirt quickly, slipped the t-shirt over her head, then ran a hand through her damp hair, which had waved up a bit. "All done?" Makeda turned with 2 mugs in hand. Her gaze zipped from Bez's hair to the tattoo covering her right arm, from shoulder to elbow. "I can put the shirt in the wash with the towel if you leave them there," Makeda said, stretching to pass a mug to Bez as if she didn't want to get too close. "It's decaf." Besnaria was still kneeling on the floor and scuttled over to a dry spot on the floor to sit, crossing her legs comfortably in front of her. The mug had ceramic flowers on it, and the shape of them pressed warm into her palm. She clutched it tightly to make sure she didn't need to perform yet another shirt switch. Makeda had listened 2 days ago when Bez had expressed her dislike of caffeine to Aura. Bez took a sip. And apparently the day before, too, when she'd mentioned liking hot chocolate packets mixed into her coffee if she did drink it. She was paying attention to Bez's details. Rule 4. Did that mean anything other than Makeda was naturally observant of things that Bez generally didn't pay the slightest attention to without explicit instruction? Thank you, Bez said, then sniffed it. No poison? Laxative? Makeda took a sip from her matching mug, her eyes wide and dark brown and just as stimulating to Bez's senses as her drink. I guess those are fair questions, since I haven't been entirely welcoming, Makeda said on a sigh. You haven't been welcoming at all, Bez corrected. You threatened me with a Hoover and then a demon cat during our first encounter. Makeda grimaced. Your presence is bringing up things I thought were in the past. I've been on edge these last few days. Is that why you attempted to bash my teeth out with your lips last night? Bez asked. Is this a fighting style found on the mean streets of Atlantic City? On second thought, I'll continue being mean to you because it's what you deserve, Makeda said wryly, but she didn't turn around and leave like she would have before last night. Progress. No need to apologize, Bez said with a casual shrug, though she imagined those things had to do with the call she'd overheard the night before. She'd stayed up late looking through the Iberonian Embassy's file on Ashley Hicks. She'd perused it before to verify that the claim had been made and rejected, and upon closer inspection, found that the embassy had named Ashley a persona non grata. She was someone to be escorted off embassy premises thanks to her erratic behavior regarding her claim to the throne. Bez had grown up with a family proud of its heritage, but not consumed by it. Henna Jetta often asked her to not care as much as she did. How would she have felt if her grandmother had tried to force her to care about it, if she had made it seem more important than Bez herself? I'm not apologizing, Makeda said, just acknowledging that I haven't been very hospitable. I think you can understand why having an intruder show up and try to force me into a spotlight that burns would make me irritable. That's fine, too. I'm used to people being mean to me. Makeda's gaze jerked to Bez as if pulled by a string, and Bez saw something familiar in her expression. Protectiveness. It was usually Bez doing the protecting, and it was odd to have that look turned onto her. She realized it might lead to another P word, pity. No, Bez said, waving one of her hands. I'm fine. I'm too much. I always have been, though it took me a while to understand that. I have 4 older siblings who are also too much, you see. So, when I was at home, my too muchness was spread out among them, and my parents, and my Henna Jetta. When I started school and my too muchness was in its more concentrated form, I learned that the average person can't handle it. That's acceptable to me. It means I end up surrounding myself with above-average people in my personal life. She didn't, in fact, have many close people in her personal life, apart from her family. But like her investigator ranking, Makeda didn't need all of the details about that. Makeda worked her bottom lip with her 2 front teeth as she regarded Bez, and her fingers flexed around the mug she held. Bez didn't know why, but she suddenly thought of a dog who'd been trained not to eat a biscuit and was balancing one on the tip of its nose. I understand that, in a way, Makeda said, softening a bit. Besnaria didn't want pity, but she'd take it if it meant Makeda would be more receptive. Bez downed the rest of her coffee. Can I change the subject to what I want to talk about? I don't have much time here, and your background is far more interesting than mine. Makeda laughed lightly, then leaned back against the counter. I doubt that. It's about your strong anti-princess sentiments, Bez said, barreling past any talk that might bring up certain residual feelings about her time in maritime security. In my line of work, I've seen people who are willing to do anything, lie, forge, cause grievous bodily harm to get the chance to meet royalty. To become royalty? I've seen people do things you simply wouldn't believe. But you seem angry at the possibility. Why? Please at least let me know why I failed to convince you. Because I know what happens when you buy into the fairy tale hype. Makeda lifted the heel of one of her sock-clad feet to rub the ankle of the other. Sure, the money would be nice, and so would a free trip. But that doesn't change how I feel about everything else. And how do you feel? Bez asked, trying to carefully insinuate herself into a crack in Makeda's emotional fortress so she could settle in for her last siege. Like I'm just a regular person, Makeda said. Look at me. Dropping a crown on my head or sticking me in a ball gown would just be me in a crown and a ball gown. Bez studied her. And this is a bad thing. It would be silly. Ah, the film heroine who doesn't know her worth, right? Well, I'm going to have to disagree with you. My glasses are clean now, and even when they weren't, I could see there's nothing silly at all about you, in or out of a ball gown. Well, you can join my mom in the Makeda is a Princess Club. Everyone else, and I mean everyone else, found the idea that I could be one fucking hilarious, Makeda said. She tugged at the bottom of her shirt with her free hand before shoving it into the pocket of her shorts. Ah, the opening expanded, and Bez shoved the tip of her proverbial lance into it before it could close. The royal family generally wore loose-fitting trousers, regardless of gender. When a royal family is descended from a pirate queen, their conventions are a bit different than what you've read in fairy stories, and most people aren't fool enough to laugh at them about it. Makeda's chin lifted, and when her gaze met Bez's, interest shimmered in her eyes. See, this is why I know my grandmother or Prince Kashan is lying. If I was really the long-lost Iberonian heir, between this Queen Lala and Grandma, I should be some kind of badass who gives nary a fuck about what other people think or what they need. I'm not. She gestured toward herself with both hands, a sweep up and down her body that Bez's gaze followed intently. The soft curve of her shoulders, the swell of her breasts, delicately tugging the buttons of her pineapple-covered Hawaiian shirt, the press of her shorts into those thighs. Makeda cleared her throat, and Besnaria pushed her glasses so far up her nose that her lashes brushed against the lenses. She tried to look like she hadn't just been on an extended tour of Makeda's specific Hicks lines, and said, caring what people think and need is a form of badassery, especially when you've encountered people who don't deserve such grace. That probably sounded like fancy words meant to flatter, but it was true. Bez didn't necessarily care what people thought and often didn't understand, but she was a Chet Chevalier, a protector. She could fight and she could scheme, but caring for other people, even if it wasn't always in the way they expected her to, was in her DNA too. Makeda's fine brows pushed toward one another. No, I don't think you understand. I'm a pushover. Like a clown, Bez said. Wow, I guess that's accurate, but that's a bit harsh. No, like the toy, Bez said, laughing. I had a terrifying clown toy that was my father's when he was a boy. You push it, it falls over, but then it pops back up because nothing can keep it down. A pushover. No, that's not what it means. Makeda crossed her arms over her chest and glowered down at Bez. Nice. Sweet. Doesn't stand up for herself. Absolutely not a badass. I see, Bez said with a solemn nod, suppressing her grin. The demon cat sauntered into the kitchen and walked straight toward Bez, climbing into her lap and settling there. Bez stiffened for a moment, but then looked down at the small creature and rubbed a fingertip over the wrinkled crown of its head. Hello, little friend. Perhaps you can make use of these. She grabbed one of the sleeves she'd cut off and slid it onto the cat. Excellent. If one has a familiar, it should wear a matching outfit. I thought you were scared of Kojak, Makeda said, kneeling down in front of Bez and Kojak, who seemed to be pleased with his new outfit. I can move him. No, Bez said, reaching out to stay Makeda's hand. I read up on these cats. Did you know that sometimes other cats reject them simply because they look different? I, a Machet Chevalier, I do not join in the persecution of the downtrodden, whether they be human or feline. Kojak is now my friend. Now make sure he always feels welcome. I won't fight animals, of course, but I will send disapproving looks at any cat rude enough to reject him. I will. She cut off her tangent. Kojak, appreciate your passion, Makeda said, flashing her dimple of doom. As Bez stared at her, Makeda reached out to pet the cat too, but pulled her hand away when her fingertips bumped into Bez's. So far, you've only told me what you don't want, Bez said. Can you tell me what you do? Besnaria had said many things that visibly upset Makeda, but this was the first time the woman looked stricken. Her fingers curled into her palm, away from Bez's, and she stood abruptly. I should let you finish up with the sink, she said, then tossed off what had come to be a familiar jab between them. Since you'll be leaving soon. Bez nodded. I will be leaving soon. She'd heard back from her contact and her means home had arrived. Bez should be on it when it was ready to depart, but leaving for Iberania without Makeda seemed like more than breaking a promise to her grandmother now. Oh, well, that's good. Makeda started to walk away. Wait, Besnaria called a bit too loudly. When Makeda turned around with raised brows, she hurried on. I was thinking of taking a walk this evening, in case it's my last one here, to catch the sunset from the Ferris wheel before I go. Will you come with me? Makeda stared at her for a long moment and then shook her head. No, I think it's best for you, me, and my swollen lip, if that doesn't happen. When she left, Bez returned to the pipe she'd abandoned, collecting all the thoughts that crashed about in her head like waves at cross currents. She should be doing whatever it took to bring Makeda back to Iberania, but that wasn't why she'd asked her out. She had some inkling of the reason why she had, but decided it was just curiosity. She needed to know what Makeda wanted, and fast. If she found that out, she could use it to bribe her into going to Iberania. Wanting to know for any reason apart from strategy wouldn't bode well for a 10th generation Dame of the Guard. Chapter 8. Makeda tried not to feel anything about Besnaria leaving. She wanted the woman to go, and she was going to. Problem solved. Life would go back to normal. Except there was no normal, really. It wasn't that she didn't love her grandmother or get fulfillment from work at the B&B, but Besnaria had asked Makeda what she wanted, and Makeda had no answer that she could share. So far, you've only told me what you don't want. Because that was how Makeda had lived her life. Building contingency plans against the things she didn't want to happen, and searching for troubled waters even when the seas were clear. She always had goals and things to do, and those things generally improved the lives of others. But wants, desires, those were way down deep in the watering can, weighted down with concrete blocks. Makeda couldn't think of what she wanted without thinking of what inevitably happened when she let herself hope, even a little bit. People laughed at her, or the scarier prospect, they left. Her girlfriends had, her mother had. Besnaria hasn't. It was the investigator's job to hound her into going to Arborania, but Makeda had been ruder to the woman than she'd ever been with anyone. She'd called her annoying, ripped her clothes, accidentally mouth-butted her. She'd told her no so many times that it felt natural. And still Besnaria remained, cheerful and exasperating. Except she was leaving, and soon. Good, Makeda said out loud. Her cell phone rang and she jumped. Her mother had called the B&B a few times that day, and Makeda had avoided picking up, afraid of what her mother might say and how she might respond to it. She'd heard Grandmore speaking to her mother in low tones, and Makeda's stomach had twisted in knots as she wondered what they were talking about. Would it be Makeda's fault if her mother fell back into her obsession? Would her first attempt at selfishness turn out exactly how she had always feared? Would putting herself first mean making someone else suffer? But the current call was from Grabright, which was a less existential annoyance. I told you I wasn't doing work for you anymore, Lindsay, Makeda said calmly. Talk to Mr. Romano if you feel you aren't fit for the job. Oh, she definitely wasn't fit, Mr. Romano said, teasing vexation in his voice. Corporate learned the hard way. Things have not gone well over the last few months, and now that we have an actual quarterly report, they want you back. What? Makeda's head spun. This was so far from what she'd expected when she picked up the phone. You're giving me my old job back? I'm giving you mine, actually. He laughed. They're transferring me to the new store opening up, closer to my house, and I recommended you to replace me. Once they saw the mess Lindsay had made of things, well, I got reamed out, but they recognized their mistake. Can you start in a month? Pleasure surged through her. No, not pleasure. Purpose. She didn't need to think about what she wanted anymore. She would have a job. She'd make money to pay off the debt from Amber's business. No need for confusion, just work and goals and life sorting itself out for her without confusing feelings like anger and a hunger for Bez's mouth that had resulted in bodily injury. A month. Of course. Thank you, Mr. Romano. Corporate will email with details, he said. Congrats, Makeda. Makeda stood with her phone in her hand. She was so close to being rid of the investigator, a situation she definitely didn't have conflicted feelings about at all. She had a great job lined up, one that she'd worked hard for. Everything was falling into place for her. Her life could go back to how it had been before. Her days planned and orderly. Her skills put toward helping others. Her watering can would refill and she'd be kind and helpful again. That was what she wanted. She could tell Besnaria, even if some part of her wondered if it would be the truth. It didn't matter either way. It had to be the truth for now. Grandmore shuffled into the dining room, expression pensive. We need to talk, she said, sitting down heavily. Is this your last attempt to convince me I'm missing out on Iberania? Makeda asked, then tugged her lips up into the smile that had come so naturally to her just a few months ago. Well, wait until you hear who just called me. If it's the same person who called me. It was the bill collector, Grandmore said, and her tone was one that Makeda had rarely ever heard. Dead seriousness. Makeda's celebratory mood crashed into the wall of Grandmore's foreboding look. What are you talking about? Why didn't you tell me about the debt? Grandmore asked. Debt? Makeda tried to figure out what Grandmore was talking about. There was no way she knew about the loan you co-signed for Amber Vincent, that she stopped paying so it fell on to you, who has equity in the Golden Crown B&B. Makeda felt sick, absolutely sick. She thought she had everything under control, but she hadn't considered that this could hurt her grandmother in any way. "I've been trying to take care of it," she said weakly. Even if it had just been the minimum payment, it had been something. "It got sent to collections," Grandmore said. "I'm not mad, even though I warned you about that girl. But I'm not going to lose my home because of one of your little friends." "I just got offered a job at GrabRight," Makeda said feebly. "It starts in a month. Do you think the collection company is going to wait for you to get your first paycheck 2 months from now? For a house in a prime vacation rental area in the middle of renewal? They'll knock this place down and turn it into a condo full of Airbnbs. What about Mom and Bill? Can they chip in and I'll pay her back?" Her mother had the stability she'd never given to Makeda, and it would be nice if she could spare a bit of it for once. Makeda had never asked for anything before, and now would be a great time to cash in her guilt chips. "Your mother and Bill are having a rift because she started talking about maybe going to Iberania if you don't. He called me to discuss it." Grandmore's expression was weary. "If I ask her for money when she knows that there's money supposedly waiting over there..." Her grandmother made a pained sigh, and Makeda remembered she wasn't the only one worried about her mother, even if Grandmore didn't always express it. Makeda laughed a little, the laugh of a driver who'd successfully weaved their way through a 10-car pileup, only for their brakes to give out right as they approached a cliff. "Kada, I don't want it to happen like this, but I don't want to lose the B&B, and I don't think you do either." Grandmore rubbed the space between her eyebrows. "This is a mess." Makeda stood up, shaky on her legs. "I'll be back. I have to think." There was nothing to think about, really, but she felt hemmed in, and maybe the beach and the familiar, limitless horizon would soothe her. She wouldn't be alone for long, she figured. There was blood in the water now, and Besnaria would show up eventually. It took longer than expected. The sun had started to set when a long, lean shadow stretched over the sand toward her. "Do you have anything to do with the lien on the B&B?" Makeda asked bluntly. "You apologized in advance for making me come with you. And now I'm between a rock and a hard place, and you're here with the grease." "I don't know the difference between a rock, which is hard due to its nature, and a hard place, but I assure you I didn't put you there." Bez dropped down beside her in a fluid movement. "I knew about your debt, and I'll admit I'm capable of meddling in such a way to get what I want. I didn't this time, even though it would have saved me a lot of trouble. I could have arranged it before I arrived on your doorstep, along with a series of other calamities, and you would have been so grateful when I showed up offering money to save you that you would have..." Bez's gaze dropped to her mouth, then out to sea. "You would have agreed immediately." Makeda gave her a withering look. "Thanks for enacting the slightly less villainous plan of breaking into the B&B and refusing to leave until you got what you wanted." "You're welcome," Bez said with a nod and a mock bow. "I guess I should just believe you then." Of course, this was the result of conveniently timed bad luck, and not the investigator from a shady organization who threatened to grab me off the street. "I asked if you wanted me to grab you. I didn't threaten," Besnaria corrected. "And instead of assuming it's bad luck, it might make you feel better to think of it as fate." "Same difference," Makeda said, wrapping her hands around her shins as she watched the sun drop a bit closer to the horizon and the sky grow incrementally darker. She'd wanted to have this win, to not cave about the one thing she'd ever stood fast about in her entire life. This was fate, all right. Some people were destined to do as they pleased, and others to do what needed to be done. You know where this debt came from? Makeda asked wryly. Your ex-girlfriend, Amber Vincent, resident of Linden, New Jersey, former owner of Party Puppers, a business that was, I suppose, just ahead of its time. She kept talking about this business she wanted to try and asking me about how we got loans for the B&B. And it was never explicit pressure, just little comments here and there, or comments about how she couldn't figure anything out. Makeda shook her head. And I just dove right in and started doing everything for her. All the things she needed to know how to do herself, because I wanted to be useful, needed. Things had started to get weird with us, but when we talked about the business planning, all she did was tell me how amazing I was. I think most people wouldn't be immune to that, Besnaria said diplomatically, and Makeda scoffed. I co-signed the loan because I thought it was the kind of commitment that meant she would stay. But she dumped me, and eventually she dumped her loan on me. And I always do stuff like that. Do things for other people like a little lap dog, even when they don't explicitly ask. I wanted this time, with you, to be different. I wanted to say no. You did say no, Bez said, kicking her shoes off and digging her toes into the sand. You didn't change. The circumstances did. I don't want to deal with this, she said. I know this was my own fault for co-signing the loan, but I am so tired of having to deal with everything. Makeda knew she was being dramatic, that she'd been dramatic at nearly every point since her grandmother had brought up the royal heir search. But her frustration boiled up in her, burning her from the inside. The truth was, she wanted something that wasn't being a princess, but that wasn't having her life's path determined by what she did and didn't do for others. Did you look at the back of the business card I gave you when I introduced myself? Bez asked. Why would I do that? Information is on the front of business cards, she said peevishly, then sighed. No, I didn't. Her eyes stung, and she pressed her lips together as reality started to sink in. Her mother had won. It was a psychological war that Makeda had tried to opt out of for 2 decades, but Ashley Hicks would get what she wanted. Makeda, in a frilly dress, grinning and bearing it as people judged whether she was princess material. Her mother would be jealous as Makeda suffered, not caring that Makeda was doing it to preserve the life her mother made without taking her daughter's needs into account. She scrunched her nose, not quite a sniffle, but almost. And Bez handed her a tissue, still warm from the pocket she pulled it from, and then another copy of her business card. Turn the card over, Bez said, and then leaned back, pressing her palms into the sand. A warm evening breeze whipped her hair around her face, the ends of her bob dancing around her jawline as the rays of the setting sun hit her. Makeda dragged her eyes away and flipped the card over to find an inscription in handwriting. Besnaria Chevalier, Commendatore, Damsel in Distress Rescue Services, Ltd. What does this mean? She turned her head to look at Besnaria, who'd been staring majestically out to sea, and whose expression shifted to one of slight annoyance. She leaned over to tap her index finger on each word as she spoke. Besnaria Chevalier, that's me. Commendatore, that's my rank. Sounds much cooler than CEO, no? Damsel in Distress Rescue Services. That's my side gig. I help people who are in sticky situations. Makeda stared at Bez for a moment. The investigator was calm, sure of herself, almost comforting, not rubbing it in her face or making jokes, even though she'd gotten what she wanted. She jerked her attention back to the card, studying the handwriting that was somehow both loopy and angular. What, you save people from dragons? Or cut them loose when they're tied to train tracks by a villain twirling his mustache? I've executed one train rescue, Besnaria said. She squinted, then pushed her glasses up onto the top of her head, where it nestled in the strands of her hair. No, two. Two train rescues. No one was tied to the tracks in either instance. Makeda carved a line through the cool sand with the card, watching as the grains filled in the furrow it left in its wake, erasing it. She had a million questions, but asked the one that made her heart beat a little faster. And you're offering to rescue me? She expected Bez to say something brazen or bizarre, in that way she had of making even a direct response as confusing as trying to exit the Garden State Parkway. But when Besnaria responded, her tone was serious. Yes. Makeda turned and found those honey-brown eyes fixed on her, revealing not a hint of anything other than determination. She realized that because Bez said odd and unexpected things, she'd started to treat Bez the same way others treated her because of her own drive to give, as if she shouldn't be taken seriously. It was one thing to be irritable, to be more easily annoyed, to even be mean, but those things were different from deciding someone wasn't worth listening to. How would you do it? She asked. Makeda didn't get her hopes up. People often talked a lot of game about what they do, whether on neighborhood committees or in more intimate relationships, and in the end, she did all the work. But still, she was a businesswoman beneath all the layers of people-pleasing. She'd hear her out. The solution for one aspect of your situation is simple. You need money. The prospects in the Royal Air Search get a participation fee. That fee is enough to cover your debt. Makeda twisted her mouth to the side. So your rescue gig has the same end result for me as your investigator gig. How convenient. This solution certainly works out for me, but it's also the most reasonable one, Besnaria said, sliding her glasses from her forehead back down to her nose. I can't offer every damsel with money woes a guaranteed $15,000 with the possibility of much more. Yes, I want you to go to Iberania with me, but I'm also offering the only solution to your problem at hand. Makeda's fingers sank into the sand, the fine grains roughed against her knuckles as her hand curled into a fist. 15,000? She hadn't realized that was the door prize for this. She'd only been thinking about being a princess and how terrible it would be. If she separated the unpleasant emotions linked to the Iberanian situation, there was money on the table when she needed money fast. And that was the bottom line. I don't know, she said, even though she already did, because she knew the investigator would indulge her reticence. You're a practical woman, Besnaria said, shucking off her suit jacket. Turning down this opportunity would be just the opposite. Her elbow got stuck in the sleeve and she struggled for a moment, and then she leaned over to drape her jacket on Makeda's shoulders. Makeda hadn't realized she'd been trembling. It wasn't from the evening air. That held late spring heat despite the sea breeze, but the sweet grass-scented heat of the jacket's lining wrapping around her still helped. You know, I get that maybe I don't make sense. This is what people hope for, right? Someone just parachuting out of the sky with the solution to their problems. Money and fame for nothing. Who doesn't want that? Makeda sighed in frustration. I don't. I grew up here watching people bleed themselves dry, ruin their lives and their families' lives, just for the possibility of hitting the jackpot. I watched my mother do it to us, because she couldn't let go of the idea she was a princess. She'd never told anyone this, had never really been able to express it. But for her mother, finding out about her supposed royal lineage had been a different kind of gamble. As she tried, run into a dead end with each effort to gain royal recognition, she'd had the same dead-eyed hope as someone glued to the penny slots for hours. The thing is, Makeda said, feeling the idea become a substantial thing instead of the unease and resentment that always set in when people tried to give her anything. There's always a catch, you know? No jackpot comes without one. Whether it's taxes or families suddenly fighting over money or people giving in to delusions of grandeur and ending up worse off than they started, it never brings the happiness people think it will. I've seen your mother's file from the Iberanian embassy, Esnaria said in a voice that held no judgment. Makeda squeezed a fistful of sand like she had when she was young and angry, but unable to show it. Sometimes she imagined squeezing it into an orb of beach glass. Her inner watering can was paved with those orbs, with all the things she'd never said and all the comments she'd let slide without clapping back. She humiliated herself, begging those people to see that she was a princess, begging anybody, everybody. She wanted me to care as much as she did, and she was mad that I didn't. My classmates started teasing me because she came to school drunk and made a scene about me being a princess, and sometimes I wondered if she did it on purpose. School was the only place I could get away from that nonsense. And then after her outburst, there was nowhere I could go without being either teased for thinking I was a princess or resented for hoping I wasn't one. It had always seemed unfair that entire industries were built on what Makeda had been tormented for, being seen as a girl audacious enough to imagine herself worthy of once upon a time. She glanced at Besnaria and found the investigator looking at her with that intense gaze, like she was solving an equation instead of listening to Makeda's nonsensical rambling. After a long silence, she nodded and finally responded. I see. My approach had the wrong framing. I played up the aspects of this I thought an American would find appealing. The royal fantasy and fame and spectacle. Everything I hate, Makeda said with a chuckle. Yes, Besnaria said. Well, you should know real royal life is significantly less glamorous. It's work. Even a ceremonial monarchy requires constant work without much recognition, which seems to be the kind of thing that appeals to you. You'll be exhausted and miserable if that makes it easier for you to give this a shot. Makeda laughed and looked out to sea, mulling over the offer she'd been rejecting for days, for years, since her mother hadn't let up on forcing the fantasy life she thought they deserved. And no one will laugh at you, Besnaria added. I don't think you can guarantee that, Makeda said. When she glanced at the investigator from the corner of her eye, Besnaria pulled her knife from her pocket and executed a skilled flourish. She could see that both the handle and the blade were painted with a motif that was similar to the waves and flowers in Besnaria's tattoo, in shades of blue and ivory. Along the blade, the word promesa had been hand-inscribed. Bez held the blade up, turning it this way and that, so it caught the weakening rays of the sun. Okay, let's say one person laughs. No one would dare it after them. She flipped the blade closed and tucked it away, looking at Makeda with an almost cheerful expression. Makeda wondered how she'd never known she had a thing for knives. Okay, then. I won't reject that part of the rescue package. I guess I should do it for the money. You should do it for yourself, Bez said. For the girl who was bullied for being called princess, and the woman who hates that I could think her a queen. Makeda instinctively shook her head. No, I'll do it, but I won't enjoy it. There's nothing in it for me except I can break the curse. The thought came to her with such clarity that she sat up straight, bracing herself as the plan began to form. Her mother would have a royal relapse if Makeda didn't go to Arborania. She was already coming up with reasons why she had to take Makeda's place. But if Makeda went and had her mother's fantasy confirmed, it was only a matter of time before Ashley Hicks found her way to Iberania anyway, prayer or no. She'd moved, physically, but you couldn't escape the dream of your heart, especially when it was coming true for someone else. If you go, you can prove to Mom that you're not a princess after all, and neither is she. I'll do it, she said, thrumming with excitement. I'll go. Berznaria was examining her again. You'll go? Yes, Makeda said. I have to. Didn't you just say it was fate? I'm going to do this for myself, too. Not just the obligation and the money. I'm going to do it because I want to be selfish. And what could be more selfish than traveling across the world to claim I'm a princess? And to prove to my family I'm not one. She would crush the ridiculous fantasies that might still cost her mother her hard-won happiness and Makeda her own peace of mind. And she'd get paid to do it. Wait, I don't have a passport, she said, as reality began to dent her plans. Berznaria reached into the lining of her jacket again, and instead of the knife, pulled out a small blue booklet. Makeda's eyes went wide, and she grabbed it from Berznaria's hand. She flipped it open and saw what was clearly a photo from the set she'd taken for her work ID. The signature was hers, too, or she would have thought it was if she knew she hadn't signed it. Is this real? Makeda asked. How many times had she picked up passport forms at the post office, taken photos, and then always found a reason not to turn the forms in, despite being on top of almost everything else? And now here was one in her hands. How did you get this? Do you think royalty stand in line waiting for passports? Berznaria asked, raising her chin. The setting sun gilded her in marmalade hues. They have people who do that for them. I know you've only seen me doing home repairs, but I'll remind you that I'm a junior investigator of the World Federation of Monarchists. If things need arranging, I arrange things. Right. Top 10 investigators. Makeda turned the passport over in her hands. She'd been thinking of this organization as an oddly menacing joke, but if they were out here with these kinds of connections. So I have a passport. How are we getting there? I got word that the transport to Iberania leaves in a few hours, Berznaria said. And you weren't going to tell me? Rude. Makeda muttered, ignoring the glancing ache at the idea of Berznaria leaving without saying goodbye, even though she shouldn't feel that for a woman who saw her as some combination of meal ticket and mission. It was a last-minute thing. Berznaria blinked at her from behind her already re-smudged lenses. You've been trying to get rid of me for days. I thought you'd be glad to wake up and find me gone. Makeda rolled her eyes. I was hoping it would get delayed a day or two so I'd have more time to woo you, but it departs tonight. This kind of travel requires that you be ready to go at any moment. Like standby plane tickets? Makeda asked. Something like that, Bez said. Standby transportation. And is there a seat for me on this standby transportation? There's a provision that allows passage for two. Bez ran a sand-dusted hand through her hair and then began batting at the strands to knock the sand away. Don't worry about it. Like I said, I'll handle things. Makeda had watched the sunset on this strip of beach hundreds of times in her life. She'd done it with women she liked and loved, and wanted to like and love her in equal measure. But she'd never sat with someone who offered to rescue her and might be competent enough beneath all that chaos to pull it off. Yes, you handle it, she said. I formally accept your offer of rescue services. Excellent. I'll print out the contract for you to read over and we'll countersign before we leave. Makeda raised her brows. Contract? That sounds serious. There's nothing more serious than honoring someone's request to be saved, Besnaria said loftily, then cut her a somewhat judgmental glance. Also, legal safeguards protect my business, and boundaries guide my interactions with my clients, making things safer for them too. Makeda ran her tongue over the still healing cut on her inner lip. A contract would be good for both of them. Besnaria stood up abruptly. Hina Jetta is going to be so happy when I bring you back. She clapped, raining sand down on Makeda, who felt her first inevitable pang of guilt. The investigator had her heart set on the fact that Makeda was really the long-lost heir just because of a birthmark and a ring. She thought she owed Makeda some kind of familial allegiance. If Makeda proved her wrong, what would that do to Besnaria? Would she resent and leave her too, like her mother had? Makeda forcibly derailed her thoughts as they slid easily into the groove of putting someone else's needs before her own, of worrying and weighing how her wants stacked up against other people's. We should go sign the contract before you change your mind, Bez said, settling things for her. Bez was happy to use Makeda. They were just two women using each other for monetary gain and personal reasons the other would never know, and Makeda would be okay with that. And we have to pack and tell your grandmother, and I have to tell Kojak I'm leaving too. I believe he'll miss me. She was already walking away. Makeda felt the urge to get up and trot after her, but instead she sat and waited for the sun to sink below the horizon. A cool breeze made her shiver, so she wrapped the jacket more tightly around herself and sank her toes into the cool sand. The sun moved quickly, candied orange fire, as it arced down below the horizon. There one moment, and gone in the space of a breath. That was the speed of change. When Makeda got up to head back to the Golden Crown, Bez was watching from the boardwalk. I thought you left, Makeda said once she'd reached the top of the stairs. I don't agree to rescue a damsel and then leave her alone on the beach. Bez reached out and adjusted the collar of her jacket, her fingertips brushing Makeda's neck. You're under my protection now. You'll get used to it. Chapter 9. Bez gripped the handle of Makeda's suitcase tightly for reasons both chivalrous and selfish. It was common courtesy to carry the bag of the person she had signed on to protect, but Makeda appeared to still be confused as to why they were at Port of Atlantic City instead of Atlantic City Airport. When she figured it out, she might try to make a dash back to the Golden Crown. Bez had the urge to run as well. She'd been so focused on finding transportation and so pleased with herself for managing it that she'd temporarily forgotten her own deep aversion to this particular mode of travel. She wouldn't run, though. She had promises to keep, and while she would bend the truth to its breaking point when necessary, chevaliers weren't oath breakers. Ora Hicks stood with them outside the gate to the port, clutching the keys to the car and ready to run defense if Makeda tried to escape. In the exhilaration that had followed Makeda's agreement and the mad dash to pack and prepare, Bez hadn't found the perfect moment to clarify the details of the travel plan she'd pulled together. She'd also been distracted by a call from her sister Dia, who'd let her know that Hina Jutta was growing despondent as neighbors, journalists, and government officials pressured her to relive Queen Aziz's disappearance again and again. She was quiet and wasn't eating enough. When Bez arrived with the true heir, all of the attention would turn to her, and the only thing people would think of when they heard the name Chevalier was that one of them managed to find a missing princess. Disgraces, both ancient and recent, would be forgotten, and hopefully any grievances Makeda held about their mode of travel. The port was all bright lights and crane shadows, with dim alleyways between the stacked cargo containers and machinery. I thought we were flying. Makeda looked up at Bez from under the hood of the giant yellow sweatshirt she was wearing, with blue jeans and canvas high-top sneakers. Her locks were pulled into a side ponytail gathered beneath her right ear, obscuring Lala's kiss. On the beach, she had seemed resolved and ready to do what was necessary to pay off her debt, but now she looked wide-eyed and vulnerable. We will be, in a way. Bess spread her arms and pinned Makeda with a look designed to convince. Flight. Over the waves. If you stand at the bow with the wind in your face and close your eyes. Something like that. Standby transportation. Makeda didn't frown, didn't roll her eyes. Her expression was stony and her gaze piercing, seeing right through Bez's evasion. You really think you're slick? Bez didn't know what that phrase meant, so she decided to take it as a compliment, as one should when given a choice between perceived insult and perceived praise. I am quite slick, though I can also be rough when necessary, she said brightly, then added, Don't forget, you told me to handle everything, which I have and will continue to do. Handling sometimes means making decisions first and explaining them later. Makeda hadn't explicitly asked for information yet, so it wasn't as if Bez were lying. How long is this trip going to take? About 10 days, Bez said. 12, maybe. It's quite fast for sea travel, and really, that's like a blink of the eye in the grand scheme of life, isn't it? So almost 2 weeks. Are you for real right now? And how am I getting home? You know I have a job waiting for me, right? You can fly back, Bess said. You'll be back in time for the job. Though they already fired you once, they'll hardly do it again for being a little late, will they? It would be rude. Makeda closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. Does Damsel in Distress Rescue Services have a review page? Because I'm gonna light you up on it. Bez, again, decided that getting lit up was probably something positive. While her methods are unconventional, she always gets the job done. That was one of my last oral reviews, though I don't have an online presence. Best not to leave a trail, Bez said. She stood up straighter and pushed her glasses up her nose. Boats are much safer than planes, you know. So if you're worried about rogue waves or hurricanes or oceanic black holes, don't be. Oceanic black holes? I didn't even know that was a thing, but now I do. Thanks for that. Blue holes would be more accurate, I suppose. Besnaria mused, thinking about the news reports she'd watched on the subject. I don't think it sucks things down into the center of the earth or an alternate dimension. It's more like an enormous roaming vortex, trapping everything in its path. Oh, just an enormous roaming vortex. Wait, that sounds like the Bermuda Triangle, Makeda said. Are we going to pass through the Bermuda Triangle? Bez nodded. Yes, actually. I made sure the boat we were on had a route that took us directly through an infamous wormhole. It shaves a few days off the trip, you see. Why are you inviting trouble? Makeda knocked on her head 3 times, her knuckles meeting the soft cotton of her hood. It generally shows up unannounced and uninvited. Bez stared out toward the port, tension pulling around her eyes, which is why worrying is fruitless. Bez was nervous too, and possibly not entirely making sense, but she couldn't stop herself. She'd been carrying out a grueling investigation for months in a foreign and often hostile land. She barely slept for the last 2 weeks and had spent the last few days repairing an old house and haggling for passage. And her work wasn't nearly over yet. She kept reminding herself that it'd all be worth it when she got home with her surprise for Henna Jetta, and when she erased the stain on her family's name, and maybe in the process, on her own honor. Aura stepped close to Makeda and took hold of one of her hands. You have the same look in your eye that Kojak gets when I pull out the cat carrier. Makeda stopped glaring at Bez to look at her grandmother. Why wouldn't I? You lie to Kojak and tell him you're taking him to the catnip dispensary. You can't just mislead people when they're expecting things to play out a certain way. Bez almost interjected that relying on a person's idea of how something would play out was exactly how you misled someone, but kept that to herself. Makeda eyed the car keys and Aura dropped them into her purse. You can't make life all orderly like an owl at grab right, Makeda. Things don't always go how you think they will. You know this. But you're scared, Aura said a bit more gently. I know you're scared. But I remember the trips we used to plan when you were young. I remember the way you used to look at the world like it was your playground. Before you stopped seeing all the fun things and started focusing only on the mess. Makeda's expression crumpled a little. That's because at the playground, some people get to play on the monkey bars, and some get to clean up the stuff those people drop on the ground while they're having fun up there. Then get on the damn monkey bars for once, Aura pleaded. Then she shook her head. What I'm about to do isn't nice, but I'm not a nice woman. Before Bez's eyes, Aura Hicks began to shrivel. Not really, but she hunched and let her expression slacken and her eyes fill with sadness. Bez considered herself a great actor when need be, but Aura was something to behold. She looked absolutely pathetic as she latched her bereft gaze onto Makeda. All I want in this life is to see you happy. Her voice shook, and so did her hands as she reached out to her granddaughter. Will you deny an old woman that? Will you send me to my grave knowing you never lived your dreams? Enough with the emotional extortion. Makeda crossed her arms over her chest and fixed her grandmother with a watered-down version of her glare. I already said I'd go, and I'm the only one in this family who keeps my word. Just promise you won't get into anything too wild while I'm gone. Don't burn down the B&B before I can pay off the lien against it, or do anything freaky in the common areas. She smiled, her feebleness disappearing. I promise no such thing, but you'll get your behind on that boat anyway. Aura swooped her granddaughter into a hug then, and the sight of it made Bez miss her own Henna so much that it was like a fist in the chest. She'd see her soon and restore their family honor and make her proud. Bez's cell phone buzzed in her pocket, and she tugged it out. Knights of the Tangerine Table. DOC. The tourism minister is driving me up the wall with this royalty search. He keeps trying to get Hannah to agree to an interview. I'm tempted to tell him yes and challenge him to a duel when he arrives. Fabrecia C. Don't stab anyone. It'll be bad for business. Your grandmother destroyed the monarchy a generation ago. It's easier to spin then. Your sister skewered her boss yesterday. And I have kids to feed. Speaking of that, has Bezzy checked in yet? DRC. It says she's online. She's online. Bezzy, are you lurking? Bez. I'm at the port. Hi, everyone. Khalid C. Are you on the ship? John told me you'd be doing security again. Be careful. Bez. Boarding soon. It's a safe route, and I'm always careful. But I will be extra careful now. You have never seen someone so careful. The world will never know my like again. Khalid C. Eye roll emoji. Dia C. Are you sure about being on a ship? After, you know. Fabrecia C. Why are you bringing this up now? Bez. I'll be fine. Vacation wasn't very relaxing, but I have a surprise for everyone. We'll show you when I get back. Fabrecia C. Of course it wasn't relaxing. Who chooses to spend their vacation in New Jersey? DLC. Hoping the crossing goes safely and you're home soon, inshallah. Prayer hands emoji. Fabrecia C. Swimmer emoji, shark emoji. Fabrecia C. Unamused emoji. Inshallah. Khalid C. Bon voyage. Bez checked her phone to see if Higgins or anyone from the investigation team had returned her phone call, emails, or texts in their work chat. It had been the middle of the night when she'd sent a message that she'd be transporting a likely heir to Iberania, but it was almost morning there now. The message had been sent via urgent channels for a project that was a jewel in their crown, and yet there was no response. Bez had to assume that everyone was off their game, or perhaps debating how to appropriately grovel after having underestimated her. A lone brain firefly flashed in her peripheral vision, signaling its concerns that something else was amiss. But Bez had to ignore it for now. She was sure when given her allotted email time in the coming days, she'd find a response, and it would all work out. Okay, you two get going, Aura said. Makeda cut Bez a narrow look as she released her grandmother, and Bez tried her own play act of pleading, but it didn't work. For some reason, Makeda's natural inclination toward meek and mildness detoured around Bez. There was something infinitely pleasing about that. We should get going. From her phone, Bez sent the email she'd saved in her drafts to the Golden Crown's email address. We won't be able to get in touch for much of the time at sea because of the lack of Wi-Fi, but we can email occasionally and make short calls via satellite phone. Mrs. Hicks, I just sent you a few links where you can track where we are at all times. She glanced at Makeda, who didn't seem to use the internet much but might not enjoy the Wi-Fi free life. Her expression hadn't changed. Aura hugged her granddaughter one more time, and then surprisingly hugged Bez, her thin arms wrapped tightly around Bez's waist. Take care of my baby. I'm trusting you. Kojak is still at the Golden Crown, though he did repeatedly try to stow away in my luggage. I mean my grandbaby. Oh, I pledge to keep her safe, Bez replied. I will protect her with my life if necessary. Aura pulled back and looked up at Bez, then laughed. Well, let's not go there. I don't want you hurt either. Bez took that into consideration. Okay, I will keep us both safe then. See to it, Aura said, then gave both of their arms a squeeze and turned to leave. That's it. I'll be gone for like a month. Makeda called after her. Aren't you even going to tell me you'll miss me? Nope. Then you'll be out at sea, all forlorn, thinking I'm moping, when in reality, I have work to do. And before those next bookings start showing up, I'm going to be eating jalapeno poppers and binging the new season of Destiny's Surrender that drops this weekend, Aura said with a wink over her shoulder. Just have fun. I'll see you when you get back. Makeda's expression was crestfallen, as if her grandmother had just disowned her instead of wishing her bon voyage. She'll miss you, Bez said, in an effort to reassure her. She just doesn't want you to worry. I bet she's wiping away tears now that she's safely in the car. Makeda jumped at the sudden blast of soul music from her car sound system just before Aura honked the horn and peeled off. She will when she gets home, Bez amended. Let's go. They won't wait for us if we're late. Bez handed their passports and the paperwork she'd saved on her phone over to the security guard, a young black man who gave them a friendly smile but didn't make small talk. The man efficiently scanned and scrolled, making notes on his tablet as he did. If Bez had been on a fact-finding mission, she likely would have talked to him about the rules of the port rather than making jokes to get on his good side, and likely wouldn't have been able to get him to give up any info. So how does this work? Makeda squinted past the guard. She also looked past the cargo ship looming over the port. A cruise won't be so bad, I guess. They looked kind of fun on the travel shows I've watched. What line is it? Carnival? Norwegian? Cruise? The guard asked, his thick brows raising. Bez shot him a quelling glance, and he didn't say anything else before wishing them a good trip. I should explain how I've taken care of things. Bez marched toward the cargo ship, watching Makeda from her peripheral vision. The reason we're traveling by sea is it's free. Nothing is free, Makeda said dubiously. A cruise certainly isn't, Bez agreed. And before you get angry, I will remind you that I didn't tell you that we were taking a cruise. I didn't tell you we were taking a plane. Those were conclusions you came to yourself after telling me to handle things. A crane lifting a huge blue shipping container crossed overhead, and Makeda flinched as the shadow passed over her. She looked up and her gaze followed the container as it was placed atop a yellow one on the deck of a freighter already stacked with them. Makeda began to shake her head as she watched crew members and dock workers moving busily around the stairs leading up the ship's deck. Now hold on a minute. She turned to Bez. A cargo ship. You have dragged me to the docks in the dark so that we can travel by cargo ship. Makeda pressed her lips together and then shook her head sharply back and forth. You're correct that nothing is free, Bez said, stopping at the base of the steps and looking up toward the deck. But lucky for us both, I have a background in maritime security. I was informed that a freighter making a stop in Arborania needed a swing crew member to stand watch and deal with any pesky occurrences like pirate attacks should they arise. I did not sign up for the risk of pirate attacks. No, ma'am. Makeda made an about face as if to head back to the port exit, but Bez casually stepped into her path. There won't be any pirate attacks. Makeda narrowed her gaze at her. People always say that before something bad happens. Next thing you know, someone will be all, I'm the captain now, and Makeda. As Naria reminded herself that she'd had time to prepare for this, while Makeda hadn't. This is a fairy tale, not a pirate adventure. The Virginia Queen is a safe and reliable ship, It has an experienced crew, and we are not passing through waters where pirates roam. I wouldn't put you in danger. Do we have to sleep in a shipping container? Makeda asked. I'm no princess in the pea, but I hope we're getting more than an air mattress in a metal box. If you want to, perhaps that can be arranged, Bez said. However, this ship has comfortable cabins. Makeda stared at the ship for a long moment, and then her shoulders drooped in resignation. You know what? Fine. Great. The Virginia Queen in the high seas it is. There was a resigned acceptance in her voice that Bez found oddly disappointing. She hadn't expected Makeda to be enthused, but she'd hoped she would be a little excited. Maybe you'll enjoy yourself, she prodded, feeling a twinge of something like guilt. Makeda scowled up at her. Don't try to convince me this is some cute romp. I'm not going to back out. I have my own reasons for agreeing to go to Iberania, and I told you that I would, so I will. Unlike some people I've met recently, I'm not a liar. Who lied to you? Bez asked, wondering how she could have missed such a thing, given her close proximity to Makeda over the last few days. Makeda's left eye twitched. You did. I didn't, Bez said, stopping mid-stride to look down at Makeda. I don't lie, except under very specific conditions, to achieve a work-related goal. Lies made for work didn't count. Her sister Dia had tried to convince Bez otherwise, but if that were true, then Bez couldn't believe what she'd been told during her brief stint in the military and maritime security, that the things she was told to do were just her job and not something that would be held against her as stains on her ethical record. Like your goal to get me to Iberania so you can claim your promotion or whatever commission you get from this. Makeda began to pace in a circle at the base of the steps, avoiding two near misses with dock workers hurrying by. You withheld information because you knew if you said, hey, we're going to go on a long-ass boat ride on a cargo freighter, I would have said no. It worked, but don't act like you were upfront about this or like I should be thrilled about it. Bez pursed her lips, then nodded. You're right, I suppose. I lied in the same way you did by withholding information about your debt from your grandmother and anyone who might help you. Makeda started marching toward the ship. Let's get on board and get this over with. Besnaria stood and watched her go, trying to puzzle out why the woman's reaction was dampening her pride at having completed the hardest part of the journey, getting Makeda onto the ship. People were disappointed in her all the time, and it mostly bounced off the armor she'd acquired over the years. Layers and layers of it, formed like pearl after each episode of her too-muchness being pointed out. If it somehow made it through all that, it was repelled by the self-assurance that had always fortified her from within. But Makeda's disappointment was like the tip of a thin blade that had slipped through a joint in her armor, cutting deep enough to wound. Bez didn't know what was more worrying, that Makeda was upset or that it could have such an effect on her. She would have to be very careful as she watched Makeda, who looked up at the ship with such plain fear that it crossed the line into bravery. Admiring the probable heir to the Iberanian monarchy was one thing. Wanting to kiss her was another. But dealing with a woman who could actually breach her innate defenses was a problem Bez had never encountered, and a challenge she wasn't sure even a Chet Chevalier could overcome.